Game of Thrones. This night needs more money. Chapter 41. The room in Harrenhal was filled with the mixed scent of old parchment and some faint spices. Worden stood trembling before the dark red desk, his head bowed low, almost burying it in the collar of his chainmail. A mud-splattered coin purse lay on the smooth tabletop, its opening slightly ajar, the gold dragons inside faintly visible. Roose Bolton did not touch the purse, he did not even look at it. You took Vito Corleone's money, yet you let the man I intended to kill walk free. His voice was very soft, yet it made Worden tremble instantly, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. While immensely terrified, he frantically racked his brain, trying to figure out which son of a fool under him dared to betray him. Don't bother guessing, Worden. Roose seemed to see right through him, his eyes appearing to know everything. No one can hide anything I wish to know from me. Whether it is at Dreadfort, or here. He leaned back slightly in the high-backed chair, his pale fingers lightly tapping the armrest. Worden risked a glance out of the corner of his eye, his lips mumbling as he tried to defend himself. My lord. I. Ha ha. Just as he spoke, Roose let out a soft laugh, as if remembering something amusing. Since you took his money and did his bidding, Worden. Then, you shall go follow him. Ah. Worden suddenly raised his head, his eyes filled with disbelief. He fell to his knees with a thud, his voice even taking on a sobbing tone. My lord. I apologize, I did not intentionally try to hide it from you. I have followed you for over 10 years, and my father served the House Bolton his entire life, please consider my. I said. Before he could finish his tearful plea, Roose Bolton, seemingly unwilling to listen to Worden's rambling, raised his voice slightly, stating in an undeniable tone. You are to go follow him. So, you actually came to follow me. Corleone, riding a relatively docile pack horse, was slightly jostled by his unskilled riding, and couldn't help but tease. On the shore of God's Eye Lake, the autumn sunlight scattered across the shimmering surface, reflecting Worden's serious face, which looked as if he were constipated. Hearing this, Worden's face turned ashen, he gripped the reins tightly and replied curtly, This is Lord Bolton's order. I must escort you safely back to King's Landing, and retrieve his payment. Payment. Hearing that word, Corleone gently pulled the reins, slowing his horse slightly, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The agreement between him and Roose Bolton was mostly based on unspoken understanding and potential future interests, and did not involve any specific payment. What payment? Corleone tentatively asked, but Worden merely shook his head, his brows tightly furrowed. My lord did not specify. He only commanded me to go directly to Duke Tywin once we reach King's Landing. This answer was vague, and Corleone narrowed his eyes slightly. He thought that given Worden's character, he was unlikely to be lying, which made the action itself intriguing. What did Roose Bolton mean by this move? Sending a trusted retainer along, was it surveillance? Or did he have another motive, hoping to establish a more direct connection with Tywin by escorting Jaime back? There was too little information, he couldn't yet figure out all the implications. Worden, standing nearby, gritted his teeth and cursed under his breath. If I find out which fool drank my wine, took my reward money, and still dared to stab me in the back and inform. When I return to the north, I swear I'll strip him naked and hang him on the walls of Dreadfort, letting the crows peck out his eyes. Watching his righteous indignation, Corleone merely shook his head gently, a meaningful curve playing on his lips, and offered no response. This kind of thing was actually easy to deduce. Whoever gained the most benefit from this matter, or eliminated potential trouble, was the most likely mastermind. But he had no intention of enlightening Worden. Let this muscle-headed northerner figure it out slowly on his own. After all, he still had unanswered questions himself. Keep an eye on that fellow, blood of my blood. Shaking his head and no longer dwelling on these matters, Corleone turned his gaze to the other side and reminded loudly, don't let him actually die. My big business deal still needs him as a stepping stone. Yes, blood of my blood. Rorger, still unconscious, was tied horizontally across Yigo's horse, bouncing like a sack of goods as the horse moved. He responded in a deep voice, reaching out to check Rorger's ropes and give him some slack. However, just at this moment, woo tilde tilde. A deep and drawn-out horn blast suddenly came from the tree-lined road ahead and to the side. Following that were rapid and dense hoofbeats, approaching quickly and becoming clearly audible. Rumble rumble tilde tilde. Judging by the sound, the approaching group was numerous, even the ground seemed to tremble slightly. Corleone's pupils contracted. Without time to think, he immediately shouted sharply, "Be on guard." Even though he had lost his right hand, Jaime's reaction was the quickest, instantly drawing his longsword. Brienne spurred her horse to block Corleone's front side. The ridiculous dress she wore had long since been replaced by her previous armor, and in an instant, her sword and shield were in hand, making her look extremely formidable. Yigo abandoned untying Rorger, drew his longsword as well, and let out an inexplicable low growl from his throat. Even the gloomy-faced warden instinctively drew his weapon, looking nervously toward the source of the sound. This fellow was actually quite reliable. Despite his resentment, he now displayed the quality of a veteran, quickly forming a simple yet effective triangular defensive formation with Brienne and Yigo, protecting Corleone in the center. Their quick reaction also proved that although this temporary small team was not large in number, every single person was an elite. Everyone looked out warily, staring intently in the direction of the road. After only a few breaths, a troop of cavalry appeared from the depths of the tree line, as if materializing out of thin air. There were about 20 or 30 men in the group. They were not charging at full speed, but their pace was by no means slow, and the distance between them remained perfectly consistent, also indicating great skill. The synchronized running of the horses brought a strong sense of pressure as they advanced straight toward Corleone and the others, clearly having already spotted their tracks. Corleone looked up, completely unable to determine whether this group was friend or foe, only reaching into his chest and squeezing the travel warrant issued by Roose Bolton. As the distance closed, his pupils suddenly contracted. At the very front of the column, a tall banner fiercely tore at the air in the autumn wind, flapping loudly. Against a pitch-black background, like the bottomless cold night, was embroidered an incredibly striking white sunburst, seemingly emitting a sharp brilliance. A white sunburst. Corleone squinted at the sigil on the banner, murmuring softly. Fragments of information about the great houses of Westeros, gathered since before his transmigration, flashed through his mind. He was certain he had seen this highly aggressive pattern somewhere before, but he couldn't recall it immediately. It felt like a fishbone stuck in his throat. Just as he was racking his brain, Warden beside him blurted out, "Karstark. It's people from Karstark. Why are those fellows here?" Karstark. Hearing the surname, Corleone's heart skipped a beat, his brow instantly furrowed, and his gaze involuntarily flicked toward Jaime beside him. Speaking of the feud between this fellow and Karstark, one inevitably had to mention that famous battle. The Battle of the Whispering Wood. In that battle, the Kingslayer displayed great prowess, taking the king in the north alone. Although he ultimately failed, he still killed more than a dozen of Robb Stark's guards, including the two sons of Lord Rickard Karstark. Later, Robb's mother, Catelyn, eager to save her daughters, secretly released Jaime, who was a captive. Lord Rickard was furious and quickly led men to the prison in Riverrun, killing the two captives, Tion Frey and Willem Lannister, to vent his anger. Then, the just king in the north, in a fit of inexplicable madness, insisted on sentencing Lord Rickard to death for two insignificant captives, and personally chopped off his head. House Karstark thus broke ties with Stark. In Corleone's view, none of these people had a normal mind, they simply acted on whatever impulse struck them. First, secretly releasing the most important hostage, and then repeatedly betraying their most reliable and powerful ally, all while calling it justice. Truly, beyond words. But none of that mattered. What mattered was, as Worden had complained, why were these fellows appearing near God's Eye Lake? One must know that just a bit further south was the territory of the Lannister army. This was absolutely no coincidence. They mean trouble. He murmured softly, his voice barely audible even to himself, but his solemn expression made Jaime and Brienne extremely confused. After all, Corleone always appeared to be in control, even when facing Roose Bolton earlier, he had not shown such a look. Everyone, follow my instructions. Corleone pondered for a moment, his gaze sternly sweeping over his group, his voice clear and strong, remain restrained. Let's figure out their intentions first. Do not provoke them first unless absolutely necessary. Hearing this, everyone nodded in agreement, with absolutely no one raising any objection to Corleone giving orders. In the group, there was clearly the eldest son of Castle Rock, the eldest daughter of the Earl of Tarth, and an excellent Dothraki warrior. Yet, everyone unanimously recognized Corleone as the leader of the team. Perhaps this was the manifestation of his charisma. After speaking, Corleone looked at the approaching group, and then at Jaime. Suddenly, a flash of inspiration struck him, as if he had remembered something crucial. He quickly turned, pulled open a bulging satchel on the horseback, dragged out a thick cloak, and tossed it to Jaime beside him. Jaime instinctively caught the cloak, his face filled with astonishment. Stop the nonsense. Corleone glared at him and reminded him sternly, if you don't want to have your head chopped off like the Karstark, put it on quickly. Oh, and remember to put the hood up and hide that beautiful golden hair of yours. Rumbled tilde tilde. The rapid sound of hooves came to an abrupt halt about 20 paces in front of Corleone's group. The rising dust slowly dissipated, revealing the true appearance of the northern cavalry unit. About 20 cavalrymen stood silently, reining in their horses. Their attire was completely different from the refined splendor of southern knights, showcasing the rugged bravery typical of northerners. Most soldiers wore crudely forged black iron half-helms and heavily worn mail armor, covered by a thick layer of animal hide. Judging by the material, one could vaguely distinguish wolf, bear, and even seal pelts. Their weapons were also varied. Two-handed great swords, heavy battle axes, spiked maces, and the broad-bladed spears common in the north. Their skin was rough, and almost everyone looked thoroughly weathered. Although their numbers were not excessive, the fierce aura of the northerners, condensed together, was enough to strike fear into anyone's heart. The leader was riding an unusually tall northern warhorse and was powerfully built. His beard was very thick, mixed with some gray, and he wore a gray wolf skin cloak over his armor. He did not immediately speak to question or declare his identity, he merely slowly urged his horse forward, scanning Corleone's group as if sizing up prey. Sir. Corleone stepped forward, intending to negotiate with the other party and demonstrate his sincerity, but he was rudely interrupted the moment he opened his mouth. The man, with an exaggerated posture, held up a warhammer and roared toward the sky. That stuff is useless garbage, nothing but a bunch of sissies hiding in armor, but their armor can't stop my hammer, it smashes right through. Since coming south, how many knights' heads have I smashed, hog? Too many to count, Captain. Ha ha ha. At this, all the northern soldiers burst into raucous laughter. They forcefully slapped their shields and saddles or brandished the weapons in their hands, letting out sharp whistles and meaningless war cries. Seeing this, Corleone's frown deepened. He wasn't afraid to deal with people like Roose Bolton or even Tywin Lannister, because they at least followed certain rules, even if those rules were cruel and dark. But what gave him the biggest headache were these thoroughgoing military louts in front of him. These fellows only had slaughter and hatred in their minds, they wouldn't give him a chance to reason, and might even swing a blade before he finished speaking if they disagreed. Nevertheless, he suppressed the irritation in his heart and attempted to communicate again, his tone more cautious. My lord. I am Harag Stow, the most trusted captain of Lord Rickard Karstark's personal guard during his lifetime. Interrupting Corleone again, the man shouted loudly. But mentioning the deceased lord, a hint of hatred flashed in his eyes. We're looking for the Kingslayer, boy. Have you and your people seen that fool who sleeps with his queen sister? As soon as these words were spoken, Corleone could clearly sense Jaime's body involuntarily trembling beneath the cloak. Clearly, the other party's tone had enraged him. The Kingslayer. No. Captain Harag Stow. Corleone quickly took another step forward, drawing the other party's attention entirely onto himself. He shook his head and replied in a tone as innocent and weary as possible, we are kinsmen of Esser Fenrir Yordle. The farm we relied on for survival was destroyed by a group of fellows called the Warriors Group. To survive, we had no choice but to cross God's Eye Lake to seek refuge with relatives in Duskendale. You know, in these times, there is fighting everywhere, the Riverlands is a mess, and we just want to find a place to settle down. Fortunately, Lord Bolton is a just lord. To compensate for the mistakes made by his subordinates, he personally signed a travel permit for us. To increase credibility, Corleone lied brazenly while carefully pulling out a parchment scroll from his bosom, slowly unrolling it to reveal Roose Bolton's signature and wax seal. You may examine it, Captain Harag. He held the parchment with both hands, inviting the other party to inspect it, his demeanor open and showing no hint of fear. This made Harig Stow pause, seemingly not expecting these refugees to possess a document signed by Roose Bolton. A trace of suspicion flashed in his gray eyes, and he signaled to a subordinate beside him to step forward and take the parchment. The soldier rode over, took the travel permit, and handed it to Stow. Stow pretended to open the parchment, but his gaze did not fall upon the writing at all. Instead, he used his peripheral vision to scan Corleone's group once more. A woman who was more manly than a man. A strong man who looked even more savage than they did. A guard with a look of misfortune. A bound suspicious individual, and looking at Jamie, who was tightly wrapped in the cloak, Harig Stow suddenly raised his head, a cunning smile appearing on his face. He casually tossed the parchment to the subordinate beside him, placing his hands on his hips and declaring self-righteously, "I can't read." Hearing this, Corleone's expression darkened. They truly were a bunch of unreasonable fellows, completely devoid of logic. He clenched his fist, then pulled a pouch from his bosom. The pleasant clinking sound of coins inside clearly made the eyes of the northern soldiers light up. He tossed it toward Stow, his tone carrying a perfectly pitched note of weakness. "We are merely poor wretches, seeking only to reach Duskendale safely and escape the war, my lord. Here are 100 gold dragons, consider them our toll." As he spoke, Corleone offered a genuine, slight smile. In times of chaos, bribery was the key to smooth passage. To him, who possessed the system, gold dragons were precious, but if he lost his life, no amount of gold dragons would matter, they would only enrich others. Besides, as long as he kept his life and successfully reached King's Landing, the bathtub full of gold dragons Jamie had promised him was still waiting. On the other side, Stow caught the money pouch with one hand and weighed it. He sneered, casually tucking it into his breast without even looking, yet showing no intention of leaving. The warhammer in his hand was raised again, this time pointing directly and clearly at Jamie. "You have sincerity, but this is not what I want. That furtive fellow hiding his face, strip that disgraceful covering off him. Now." At these words, Corleone immediately gritted his teeth. The Northman, he was too rude. That was all his gold dragons. Forcing himself to remain calm, his brain working furiously, Corleone took a deep breath, activated Dignity LV2, and immediately displayed a highly professional and serious expression. "Impossible. My lord, absolutely impossible." His tone was urgent, his words amplified by the aura. "He has contracted a very serious illness and must be tightly wrapped, otherwise it will spread." Bullshit. Although the Dignity aura was active, the distance between them was still great, making it almost impossible to affect Stow. "I've fought from Cajo City all the way to the Riverlands, and I've never heard of an illness that requires someone to be wrapped up like that. Stop trying to fool me. It's true." Seeing that Stow still didn't believe him, Corleone's pupils contracted slightly, and then he firmly uttered a chilling name. "It's Grayscale. Grayscale. What the hell is that?" At the mention of the name, the northern riders immediately quieted down and began whispering among themselves. After all, the name itself did not sound like anything good. Next to Stow, an older soldier suddenly spoke up. "Captain. I think I heard my uncle, the sailor, talk about this disease. He said he saw it on the continent of Essos. The skin of those afflicted turns hard like bark and stone, and even cutting off the infected area doesn't help." Swallowing hard, he showed obvious apprehension. "Let's just go, Captain. If we catch something that means waiting for death, it's not worth it." "Exactly." Seeing that someone finally recognized it, Corleone quickly pressed his advantage. "This disease comes from across the Rhône, and it is extremely bizarre. Once infected, the skin turns light gray stone, slowly losing all sensation, eventually spreading throughout the entire body. There is no cure. The patient can only watch helplessly as he turns into a stone statue, slowly waiting for death in agony." His gaze was gloomy and his tone was chilling. "Anyone who comes near him could be infected, but since he is the eldest son of Sir Finn, we cannot abandon him." With confirmation from his subordinate and Corleone's embellishments, a trace of hesitation finally appeared on Stow's face. Instinct told him that the person beneath the cloak was highly suspicious, but he dared not gamble, not if it truly was that terrifying plague. He stared intently at the motionless gray cloak, as if trying to pierce it with his gaze. After a long standoff, he managed to force out an extremely ugly smile and turned his horse around. HMPH. What bad luck. He spat, beginning to curse obscenely. Wasting my time for a plague-ridden ghoul. Come on, let's go find that incestuous beast who climbs on his own sister. I heard that fool sitting on the Iron Throne is also the Kingslayer's and the Whore Queen's fool son, ha 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 ha. The Lion family. I think they should be called the Cursed Family. They must have done too many wicked things for the gods to punish them by giving birth to a demon the height of a half-man. As Stow turned, he began wantonly insulting the Lannister family with extremely vicious and vulgar language, growing more energized the more he spoke. I bet Tywin Lannister's wife was gnawed to death alive by that demon, starting from below. Ha 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 ha. The foul language became increasingly unbearable. Hearing this, alarm bells immediately went off in Corleone's mind. He knew Jaime too well, especially when the insults involved his beloved sister, his deceased mother, and his complicated brother. These words were equivalent to repeatedly branding his soul and dignity with a red-hot iron. Don't do anything rash, Corleone muttered internally, his heart pounding in his throat. His muscles were tense, and he had already signaled Ygritte and Brienne with his eyes to prepare for Jaime's inevitable outburst. However, to Corleone's surprise, there was no reaction beneath the gray cloak, apart from a single tremor when his mother was insulted. Harrig Stow cursed until his throat was dry, only to find the other party completely unresponsive. Feeling bored, he finally glared fiercely at the cloak, then waved his hand resentfully. Go. Leading his men, he cursed and turned his horse, riding away along the lakeside road, eventually disappearing around the corner of the woods. It wasn't until the dust raised by the riders had completely settled, leaving only the sound of the wind and the gentle lapping of water against the shore, that the tense atmosphere gradually eased. Under the gaze of the others, the gray hood was slowly pulled back by a distinctly jointed hand. His brilliant golden hair was once again exposed to the air, like sunlight piercing through dark clouds. Jaime turned his head to look at Corleone, who was still frowning slightly. There was none of the expected fury on his face, instead, he seemed unusually calm. What is it? Did you think I would leap forward like a dog whose tail was stepped on, and then make all of us die along with that fool Rickard Karstark? Jaime chuckled lightly, teasing, I am Jaime Lannister. My life is far more valuable than theirs. Hearing this, Corleone smiled and shook his head. He wondered who it was who dared to charge a dragon alone with a spear. Though that event had not yet happened. Just watch, Vito. Jaime paused, his gaze fixed on the direction where those men had departed, and a flicker of resolute fire finally ignited in his eyes. When I return to King's Landing, I will use my methods to make that foul-mouthed Harrig Stow pay the price for every single word he spoke today. Don't forget, a Lannister always pays his debts. Hearing him say this, Corleone was startled for a moment, and then a genuinely appreciative smile appeared on his face. He clearly sensed that the man before him had changed from the volatile and short-tempered Kingslayer of his youth. The agony of losing his hand and the hardships of the journey had acted like a cruel carving knife, shaving off some of his sharp edges, but simultaneously leaving behind something more dangerous and more resolute. Corleone smiled, indicating his agreement, and said sincerely, You have matured, Jaime. Hearing this, Jaime raised an eyebrow, seemingly intending to respond to the assessment with his usual sarcasm. However, just before he could speak, rumble. A sudden, more chaotic and urgent sound of hooves, accompanied by angry, desperate shouts, came once more from the direction where the Karstark party had just disappeared. Catch that fool dog. Get Arya Stark back. Arya Stark. Hearing that name, everyone's heart skipped a beat without exception. Especially Brienne, her tall body trembled violently, and she didn't even have time to wonder why Miss Stark, who was far away in King's Landing, would appear in the Riverlands, or why the Karstark men would be pursuing her. Miss Stark is in danger. She only instinctively roared. After swearing allegiance to Catelyn Tully, Brienne viewed rescuing the two Miss Starks as her most important honor and duty. Kicking her horse's belly hard, and not waiting for Corleone's command, the tall warhorse neighed and charged toward the direction of the roar like an arrow released from a bow. Follow her. Seeing this, Corleone had no time to scold Brienne for her impulsiveness and immediately spurred his mount. Jaime, Yigo, and Worden followed closely without hesitation. Regardless, they were now a fragile unit and could not allow Brienne to fall into danger alone. The group rode their horses, quickly rushing onto a sparsely wooded hill. Looking down from above, the scene below was fully visible. They saw that about 20 northern soldiers had formed a relatively tight encirclement, trapping a knight riding a tall black warhorse in the center. The knight was exceptionally burly, wearing armor stained with grime, and was helmetless, revealing his signature, heavily scarred and disfigured face, half burned. It was the Hound, Sandor Clegane. And at this moment, he was tightly holding a child disguised as a short-haired boy in his arms. Corleone, having read the original story, immediately understood. It really was Arya Stark. But, according to the timeline, the two of them should be on their way to Riverrun or the twins, so how could they appear by the God's Eye Lake? Corleone frowned deeply. Had his appearance caused a butterfly effect, or was it something else? He couldn't figure it out. Miss Stark. Just as Corleone was pondering, Brienne cried out in alarm again, gripping the reins and preparing to spur her horse down the hill once more. Overflowing with a sense of justice and responsibility, she simply could not stand by and watch her mission objective, right before her eyes, be surrounded by over 20 northern soldiers. Calm down, Brienne. Luckily, this time Corleone was quick, grabbing her reins tightly and sternly rebuking her. Look down there. With just the few of us, charging down now won't save them, but will get us killed too. But that is Miss Stark. Brienne's blue eyes widened, and she said unwillingly through gritted teeth, I promised Lady Catelyn Tully that I would bring her two daughters back safely. I know. Hearing this, Corleone gave her a serious look. We are not abandoning the rescue, but we need a plan, understand? Don't forget, my 100 gold dragons are still on that dog fool. At this moment, Jaime, who was beside her, also calmly advised, she is right, Brienne. Although I don't know why Miss Stark is mixed up with the dog, there are over 20 bloodthirsty northern soldiers down there. We have no chance of winning. Trust Corleone, he always has a way. The persuasion of the two men allowed Brienne to calm down slightly. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she looked at the heavily surrounded Arya below, then at the serious faces of Corleone and Jaime. Taking a deep breath and forcibly suppressing the boiling protective instinct within her, she finally slowly released the reins. Throughout their journey, every one of Corleone's judgments and decisions had proven correct, and she was already accustomed to following his command. Moreover, just now, even Jaime, a man so proud and quick-tempered, chose forbearance when subjected to extreme insult. She had no reason to drag everyone into danger because of her own impulsiveness. That would not be chivalry either. Seeing her calm down, Corleone temporarily breathed a sigh of relief. He turned his head, intently observing the battle below, while constantly thinking in his mind. He had to admit that Sandor Clegane's bravery was indeed astonishing. Wielding his sword one-handed, he dashed back and forth within the encirclement. His movements were swift, and every swing of his sword was powerful, successively cutting down 3 to 5 northern soldiers. His fierce valor managed to deter the enemy in a short time. However, 2 fists cannot defeat 4 hands, especially when he was holding a burden in his arms. Just as the Hound cut down another man, a warhammer smashed squarely into his back. Take my hammer, mad dog. As Harrogstow's voice rang out, the Hound fell to the ground, tumbling off his horse along with Arya in his arms. A mouthful of fresh blood sprayed directly from his mouth, staining Arya's shoulder. The Hound! Arya cried out in surprise, struggling to crawl out of his embrace. Because the Hound held Arya tightly during the fall, using his body as a cushion, the little girl was not injured. Seeing him bleeding from his mouth and nose, lying on the ground, and breathing heavily, clearly having lost his ability to fight, the fierce little wolf cub immediately drew the slender sword hidden at her waist and assumed a peculiar stance. That was the stance the first sword of Bravos had taught her. But ultimately, Arya was still just a child, and she was completely useless in front of the 20-plus northern soldiers who were eyeing her menacingly. Sure enough, just as she stood up, Harrogstow rode up and punched her, knocking her down onto the ground, unable to get up again. Ha ha ha. Stow laughed triumphantly. Did you see that, Lord Rickard? I caught the little wolf cub of House Stark. King in the North Robb Stark, he killed you. I will tie his sister up in front of him and make him personally admit his mistake in front of all the northern vassals. I will make him kneel and repent beneath the Karstark sunburst banner. But just as Stow was feeling immensely proud, a northern soldier ran frantically up to him, saying anxiously, Captain. This is bad. Hogg. Hogg was stabbed deep in the thigh, and the bleeding won't stop. What? The wild laughter on Stow's face instantly froze. Because Hogg was a companion he had grown up with, his most trusted right-hand man, and the bond between them far exceeded that of ordinary superior and subordinate. Go find one now. He immediately roared in fury. Maesters, doctors, monks, priests, I don't care what he is. As long as he can save Hogg, bring him to me. Hogg cannot die. He absolutely cannot die. On the hill not far away, Corleone heard the conversation between Stow and the soldier clearly. A sharp light flashed in his eyes, and a bold plan instantly formed. It seems. I have to return to my old profession. He turned his head and grinned at Jaime, then signaled for him to put the cloak back on. He took a deep breath and deliberately shouted in an anxious and dissatisfied tone, Don't move around, young Lord Derek. Trust me. No one in the Riverlands can cure your illness except for me. Because I am the best doctor in all the Riverlands. Corleone's voice, carried by the wind, clearly reached the chaotic battlefield below. As expected, several northern soldiers soon followed the sound, galloping up the high ground and semi-encircling them. Harrig Stow was still the first to charge, his gray eyes fixed directly on Corleone as he asked suspiciously, Hey. You just said you were a doctor. His tone was full of distrust, his warhammer still tightly gripped in his hand. But Hogg's injury forced Stow to approach, desperately trying to grasp the last straw of hope for him. Hearing this, Corleone straightened his not-so-sturdy back. The aura of dignity LV2 supported his posture. He lifted his head, wearing the confident expression of a professional. I already said before that I am a doctor. His gaze met Stow's without fear, and he repeated, and I am the best doctor in the entire Riverlands. Stow frowned, glanced at Jaime, who was wearing a cloak and whom he had mentally labeled a plague ghost, and recalled that Corleone had indeed claimed to be a doctor just moments ago. With Hogg clinging to life, he couldn't afford to worry about anything else. Very well. Come with me, doctor. Stow raised his warhammer and commanded harshly, My man is severely wounded and needs immediate treatment. Hearing him say this, a perfectly timed look of difficulty immediately appeared on Corleone's face. He hesitantly glanced at Jaime, cloaked beside him, and stammered, But young Master Derek's illness, he can't be left unattended. I must. Don't you dare worry about that plague ghost. Seeing Corleone hesitate, Stow roughly interrupted him, a look of extreme impatience on his face. Let him wait to die on his own. Or, he suddenly raised his warhammer and pointed it at Jaime. I'll chop him down right now so you can free up your hands to save my man. You choose. As his words fell, several northern soldiers immediately drew their longswords, the cold, flashing blades all pointed menacingly at Jaime. Corleone seemed intimidated by the blatant threat. He froze for a moment, then showed an expression of compromise and helplessness, deflating like a punctured ball as he said dejectedly, Since that is the case, then I will go with you. However, just as the group was about to spur their horses forward, Stow suddenly shouted, Stop. Everyone paused, watching as he warily stared at Brienne and the others, saying coldly, Only the doctor comes with us. Your companions must stay right where they are. That is impossible. The moment he said this, Brienne immediately objected sharply, her massive, bear-like body blocking Corleone's front side. Corleone is the only doctor in our party. I cannot let him go into danger. Her voice was extremely stern, but the protective meaning conveyed within was very clear. This protection was for Corleone, as well as for Arya. Following Brienne's firm roar of anger, Yigo and Worden also drew their weapons simultaneously, initiating a standoff with Stow and his men. Seeing how anxiously these people protected the doctor, Stow did not fly into a rage. Instead, he grinned, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. Good. It seems your medical skills must be excellent for them to be so reluctant to part with you. He thought for a moment, still refusing to compromise entirely, and proposed a middle ground. You can follow, but you must stay half a league away and stand guard. When my man is cured, I will naturally return your precious doctor to you. Otherwise. Saying this, Stow shook his warhammer, the threat implicit in the action. With the conversation reaching this point, Corleone naturally knew that pushing too hard would be counterproductive. Continuing to feign resistance would only provoke a more violent reaction from the other side. All right, we will do as Captain Stow says. He took a deep breath, his expression regaining its composure, and turned to instruct Brienne and the others, stay here and do not move. I will return once I have treated the man. Speaking of this, Corleone looked at the cloaked Jaime, specifically emphasizing his tone as he instructed, remember, absolutely give young Master Derek his medicine on time. Beneath the cloak, Jaime's emerald eyes met Corleone's gaze, and their eye contact transmitted a certain message known only to the two of them. Having finished speaking, Corleone no longer hesitated, actively spurred his horse forward, and walked toward Stow and his men. Because Hogg's injuries were severe, the men wasted no words, riding quickly. In just 10 breaths, they arrived at the location of the wounded man. Hogg lay on the ground, his face pale as paper from blood loss. A soldier was forcefully pressing down on the base of his thigh, but blood was still constantly surging out between his fingers. Corleone immediately dismounted, professionally knelt beside Hogg, and quickly examined the wound. Under the dual enhancement of Insight LV1 and Surgery LV2, he quickly made a diagnosis. The wound was on the inner thigh, not very long, but deep. The blood was bright red and was spurting out in rhythmic pulses with his heartbeat, rather than slowly seeping. This was the typical sign of arterial bleeding. It was extremely critical. If effective hemostasis wasn't achieved immediately, he would soon die from excessive blood loss. Fortunately, the wound at the bleeding point was not large, and the rate of blood loss had not yet reached an irreversible level. He should still be savable. Speaking of which, this fellow had truly terrible luck. It was ridiculous that he had been sliced on the inner thigh during the fight. However, he also had to be grateful for the injury, as it gave Corleone a chance to infiltrate these northern soldiers. How is he? Stow anxiously knelt beside him, his eyes fixed on Hogg's pale face and the incessantly flowing blood, urging, can he be saved? It's tricky. Corleone frowned deeply, his expression solemn, but his tone remained extremely calm and professional. He has injured a major artery in his thigh. The blood is flowing too fast. Stow didn't understand terms like arteries and veins, but the simple phrase, the blood is flowing too fast, made him immediately grasp the situation. The usually tough northern soldier, frantic, grabbed Corleone's shoulder, his voice laced with a hint of pleading, save him, doctor. You must save him. If you save Hogg, I will return all your gold dragons. No, I'll return double. Hearing this, Corleone raised his head, looked at Stow, and slowly curved his lips into a meaningful, confident smile. He's desperate, he's desperate. Corleone swiftly opened his portable medical bag, his gaze flicking toward the hound nearby, who was having his hands bound by several northern soldiers and being hoisted up a tree by a rope. Next, he squatted down and deftly retrieved a hemostat and suture needle and thread. Don't worry, Captain Stow. Corleone grinned, speaking with immense confidence. Without my permission, not even the stranger can take his life. After all, I am the best doctor in the entire Riverlands. Of all the patients I have treated, there has never been a single bad review. The twilight was blood red, staining the sky above the shores of God's Eye Lake. At this moment, Hogg's condition was extremely poor, blood continuously gushed out, staining the soil beneath his buttocks black. Stow's face was filled with worry. They were all experienced soldiers and naturally knew what continuous bleeding meant. A few years ago, Stow had encountered such a case, a hapless man whose thigh was cut by a prostitute because he hadn't paid for her services. That fellow's paternal cousin happened to be the steward of Cajo City and quickly summoned Maester Lygon, who served Lord Rickard, and Stow happened to be present. However, even Maester Lygon declared that nothing could be done after seeing the wound. Stow remembered the steward's expression at the time, which was like that of a man whose own son had died, and he pondered it for a long time, leaving a very deep impression on him. Therefore, seeing Corleone's confident appearance, he was extremely skeptical. But it was too late to say anything now. In this desolate wilderness, there was no better alternative, and they could only pin their hopes on this doctor they had stumbled upon. If he can't cure him, I'll just slaughter him and make him Hog's burial sacrifice. Taking a deep breath, Stow muttered internally. Move aside. With the boost of Insight LV1, Stow's change in expression could not escape Corleone's eyes, yet he remained completely unfazed. Not even his voice trembled, he was calm, almost cold. Pushing away the soldier who was pressing the wound on Hog, Corleone shockingly reached out his hand directly, his fingers roughly probing the wound at the base of Hog's thigh, all while the surrounding people watched in utter shock. Hiss tilde tilde. Ah! The surrounding soldiers gasped sharply. The intense pain even caused the unconscious Hog to twitch violently, letting out a cry of agony from his throat. Even Stow's eyelids couldn't help but jump. This wasn't treatment, it was clearly torture. However, seeing Corleone's calm demeanor, he clenched his fists, suppressing the urge to punch the quack doctor to death. He stepped forward cooperatively and fiercely pressed down on Hog's struggling upper body, roaring, "Hold him! Quick!" Hearing this, several northern soldiers quickly rushed up and played a game of piling on top of him. Fortunately, with their help, Corleone's work became much easier. He firmly pinched the artery with one hand, skillfully clamped it with a hemostat in the other, then switched hands and pulled out a curved, hook-shaped suture needle and thread. Without any sterilization, and under the horrified gaze of the crowd, Corleone relied entirely on his sense of touch and the muscle memory of surgery LV2. He forcefully held the curved needle, piercing the rolled-up flesh without hesitation, performing several rough through-and-through sutures and ligatures around the severed end of the blood vessel. The process of the operation was extremely painful, evident from Hog's struggles, which resembled a fish flopping on the shore. But after several professional surgical practices, Corleone was completely unfazed by the various conditions a patient might exhibit. His movements were precise and swift, devoid of any personal emotion, like a skilled cobbler mending a piece of broken leather. With every stitch, Hog's body couldn't help but jerk violently, only to be firmly suppressed by Stow and the others. The entire process was astonishingly fast. There was no debridement, no irrigation. He even directly opened a waterskin handed over by a nearby soldier, a waterskin still stained with dirt, and poured the remaining clean water onto the wound, washing away most of the bloodstains and obvious foreign matter. When Corleone finally bit off the suture thread with his teeth, the terrible wound on Hog's thigh had been forcibly closed. Although the stitches looked crooked and terrifyingly monstrous, the bleeding had, at least, stopped. All right, the bleeding has stopped for now. Corleone straightened up, casually wiping the blood from his hands on a nearby blade of grass. His tone was still utterly placid, as if he had merely finished a meal. Next, just observe him for a few more days. If the wound doesn't rot and he doesn't develop a fever, he probably won't die. His medical advice also seemed simple and crude. However, according to Corleone's own estimation, wound infection, necrosis, and fever were practically guaranteed. After all, firstly, he genuinely lacked the conditions and time for preoperative sterilization, and secondly, with arterial bleeding, the primary task was survival. According to his mentor, field surgeons on the battlefield would even pull out injured arteries and tie a knot, or simply use a small knife to cut and thrust a hand directly into the chest cavity for a cardiac massage. If the patient fainted from pain, well, that counted as anesthesia. Infection. That's something to worry about only after surviving. Compared to the advanced medical conditions of his previous life, Hog's luck was quite poor. But Corleone felt not an ounce of guilt. After all, only those who survived were worthy of being his patients. Look at Jamie, why was it that his hand was fine after rolling in the mud and soaking in horse urine? If you die from infection, it's your own fault, you jinx. Maybe, he should even thank me. By the gods, thank you so much, doctor. Just like that, Stow, who had been dumbfounded by Corleone's procedure, immediately breathed a sigh of relief when he heard the bleeding had stopped, patting his shoulder with overwhelming joy. You saved Hog. I, Harrig Stow, owe you a life. You truly are, you're amazing. After thinking for a long time, Stow, who had initially tried to use elegant words to thank Corleone for saving a life, found his vocabulary limited as a semi-illiterate man. He could only repeat words of gratitude over and over. His enthusiastic manner made it seem as if Corleone were his long-lost half-brother. However, from beginning to end, this forthright, Northerner never mentioned returning the 100 gold dragons he had previously withheld from Corleone. Corleone, meanwhile, maintained a professional smile on his face, listening quietly, and was equally tactful not to mention a single word, even gold dragon. Stow thought he had gotten a bargain, receiving top-tier medical service and keeping the 100 gold dragons for free. But in Corleone's view, this debt, along with the previous insult, would be recovered with interest. A very worthwhile business. Corleone's superb medical skills earned him a measure of freedom of movement. Stow no longer kept him under strict watch, allowing him to move around slightly within the camp boundaries, but he did not let Corleone leave yet, intending to wait until Hogg's injuries had healed. Corleone stretched and pretended to loosen his muscles and bones, seemingly strolling casually, but his gaze was fixed on the crooked-necked tree in the center of the camp. The hound, Sandor Clegane. This strong warrior was currently bound by rough hemp rope around his hands, suspended beneath a thick tree branch. His toes barely touched the ground, and the entire weight of his body pressed down on his wrists, making his already ferocious face even more distorted, with veins bulging on his forehead. Seeing this scene, a strange sense of emotion arose in Corleone's heart. After all, when he crossed over, his situation was exactly the same as the hound's current predicament. Several Karstark soldiers were surrounding the hound, constantly humiliating him, as the man had cut down several of their comrades in the previous battle. Pay. A soldier spat thick phlegm onto the hound's face. Another man used the tip of his sword sheath to fiercely strike the hound in the abdomen. Ah! The hound let out a muffled groan, but suddenly raised his head, his wild eyes full of hatred, and roared, "Romance all of you. If I hadn't been starving for 2 days and lacked strength, all of you useless wastes combined wouldn't be a match for me." He tried to maintain his dignity through roaring, but his words were like pouring oil on a fire, instantly enraging the soldiers. "Still running your mouth when death is upon you." One of Stow's personal guards immediately flew into a rage, pointing at the hound and shouting, "This mad dog killed 5 of our men. Put the rope around his neck and hang him. Yes. Hang him. Strangulate him. Avenge our dead brothers." As soon as this was said, everyone immediately became agitated. Several men immediately stepped forward, ready to untie the ropes suspending the hound's wrists and place the noose around his neck. The hound gritted his teeth, his eyes fixed intensely on the personal guard who suggested hanging him, as if to carve the man's image into the depths of his soul. But at this critical moment, a voice tinged with regret suddenly rang out. What a pity! The sudden sound startled everyone, and they looked towards its source. They saw Corleone, who had appeared standing nearby at some unknown point, arms crossed, slightly shaking his head. His face held an expression of deep, painful regret, as if he had lost hundreds of millions. What do you mean, a pity? This action provoked the dissatisfaction of the personal guard, who immediately frowned and shouted, "This mad dog killed so many of our men. His capture is a gift from the old gods. Mind your place, doctor. Don't think that just because you saved Hogg you can speak loudly in my presence. Continue." Having said that, he waved his hand, signaling his men to proceed. However, Corleone seemed unwilling to stop. Instead, he kept his arms crossed and continued to make a tisk, tisk, tisk sound. What the hell? Exasperated, the personal guard turned to Corleone, drawing his sword and threatening, "You better explain yourself clearly. If your answer doesn't satisfy me, I guarantee you'll be in hell before this stray dog." Hearing this, Corleone merely shrugged, offering no comment on the threat. He didn't even spare the guard a glance, slowly pacing forward until he stopped just a few steps away from the hound. "I've heard of this fellow, Sandor Clegane, Duke Tywin Lannister's the Hound. It is said this man killed someone when he was 12. He once served as King Joffrey Baratheon's Kingsguard and contributed significantly during the Battle of the Blackwater River. Later, he was relieved of his Kingsguard duties for publicly insulting the king and deserting. I am not a deserter." Hearing Corleone recount his history in detail, the hound angrily spat, "At the Blackwater River, I killed more enemies than anyone. I was just sick of risking my life for those so-called great lords. I gave up that white cloak myself, it was dirtier than dog shit." The hound's roar echoed throughout the woods, but the northern soldiers merely looked on with cold eyes. After all, They too had lost their lords and comrades, not to mention that no one present was the type to be soft-hearted. We don't have time to listen to your pathetic, shitty history, traitor. The personal guard spat on the hound, then turned to Corleone and urged, hurry up, kid. Don't let me hear one more word of nonsense from you. My patience is limited. This time, the urging seemed to work, and Corleone stopped beating around the bush. I said, it's a pity. He repeated, his tone heavier, surveying the surrounding northern soldiers, haven't you heard? Not long ago, the late King Robert held a tourney to welcome Duke Eddard Stark. This Lord Sandor Clegane, he was the champion. Corleone paused after speaking, silently observing everyone's reaction. Seeing that the soldiers were all utterly baffled, he muttered internally, these northerners really are stubborn mules, every single one of them. How can they not grasp such a simple and obvious point? Since that was the case, Corleone had no choice but to spell it out. If I recall correctly, the champion of the joust, the prize money was a whopping 40,000 gold dragons. Whoosh! How much? 40,000 gold dragons. How many times would you have to visit the Moulin Rouge to spend all that? I heard that old Tywin Lannister even has golden toilets. If I had that much money, I'd have to replace my saddle with a golden one. Nonsense, I distinctly heard that even the shit Tywin produces is gold. As Corleone's voice faded, it immediately caused an uproar among the northern soldiers. After all, the number 40,000 gold dragons exceeded the imagination of every single one of them. They knew that, disregarding the quality of the troops, that money was enough to raise an army of 10,000 men, or even buy the entirety of Keho City with change left over. Man will die for wealth, and the bird for food. In a brief instant, greedy light flickered in every pair of eyes. All the soldiers, including the personal guard, began breathing heavily, staring intently at Sandor as if they wanted to devour him alive. Hand over the money, the hound. He shouted while roughly frisking the hound, ripping open his tattered leather armor and searching every pocket where money might be hidden. Naturally, he found nothing. Aside from bloodstains and mud, not even a single copper coin could be found on the hound. Reg, you idiot. Do you know how much 40,000 gold dragons is? Who could carry that much money on their person? So this guy spent all the money. Bullshit. Another soldier yelled. How long ago was the tourney? Less than a year. 40,000 gold dragons, he couldn't spend all that even if he bathed in it every day. Exactly. Hearing this, the personal guard named Reg immediately slapped his forehead. This fool must have hidden the gold. Hidden it somewhere only he knows. This perfectly correct conclusion was instantly agreed upon by everyone. Fists, boot heels, sword scabbards, and even scavenged sticks began raining down heavily upon the hound's body. Tell us, where is the gold hidden? Speak now, or I'll flay you alive. Beat him. Keep beating him until he talks. Faced with this crude interrogation, the hound gritted his teeth, choosing to remain silent even if it meant death. He had indeed won, and he had indeed possessed a huge fortune, but all of it had been stolen by that son of a fool Beric Dondarrion, who deserved to burn in the seven hells. All his valuables were confiscated, they only left him his horse, armor, and weapons. This caused the hound to go hungry for 2 consecutive days, which was the real reason his combat strength was so diminished today, leading him to be captured alive by these scumbags. But could he say that? Admit to these northern fools that he, the terrifying, the hound, not only had his money stolen but was also so weakened by hunger that he couldn't beat them, ending up strung up and interrogated like a stray dog. That would be worse than killing him. As for him winning against Dondarrion in the fight. Please, who would believe that? How stubborn the hound was, once he had made up his mind, there was probably no one else who could compare, save for a certain one-handed man. He allowed these men to beat him, but he still wouldn't speak. The fire in his ugly eyes did not extinguish, instead, it burned even more fiercely due to his stubbornness and pride. The beating continued, and the soldiers grew increasingly agitated because they were not getting an answer. Seeing that if this continued, the hound might really be beaten to death, Arya Stark, who had been tied up and tossed aside, could no longer hold back. His life can only be taken by me. She gritted her teeth, giving herself an excuse in her mind to help the man. However, just as Arya was about to speak, the voice of that annoying doctor rang out once more. Stop. Don't hit him anymore. If you keep hitting him like this, you won't get a single copper coin even if you beat him to death. This call slightly sobered the men who were gradually descending into madness. Their actions paused, and they looked at him in confusion. Haven't you figured it out yet? Corleone slowly stepped forward, his finger pointing steadily at Arya Stark, who was curled up on the ground. He spoke matter-of-factly. Why would the loyal dog of the Lannister house be staying with the sister of the king in the north? It's obvious that this girl is quite important to him. As he spoke, a cold, sinister smile appeared on Corleone's face. We don't need to waste any more energy torturing this hard-headed the Hound. We only need to take good care of Miss Stark right in front of him. At these words, the Hound was the first to roar. But after only a moment, he immediately changed his expression, sneering, "Haha, you idiot. That girl is nothing but my captive. I was planning to take her to Riverrun to exchange her for ransom from the king in the north. You're stupid enough to threaten me with her. Ha ha ha." This unrestrained laughter reached Arya's ears. She suddenly lifted her head, and a flicker of bewilderment first crossed her gray eyes. Immediately after, endless anger and grievance overwhelmed her reason. The Hound. She had actually thought of speaking up for this scoundrel just now. The Hound. Feeling betrayed, Arya immediately shrieked, "You pock-faced monster, you deserve to have your face burned by your brother. You're just a mad dog nobody wants, I curse you to the seventh hell." She cursed him with extreme malice. The street slang she had learned while wandering the Riverlands these days burst out like a string of firecrackers. Even the Hound was stunned by the vile language. He curled his lips into an arc, feigning an even more enraged look, and retorted, "You little brat, try saying that again. When I get free, I'll choke you to death first, then knock off your skull and use it as a drinking cup. Come on. Come on right now." Facing the Hound's verbal assault, Arya was not intimidated in the slightest, her little mouth as sweet as honey. "Useless trash, a dead dog hanging there. You're even more disgusting than Joffrey and Cersei. You think I don't dare?" The two of them fiercely cursed at each other, various vulgar words echoing through the woods, immediately seeming out of place with the previously tense interrogation atmosphere. This sudden internal conflict instantly dumbfounded the Northman soldiers who had been itching for action. Wait. This doesn't really look like a good relationship, does it? They looked at each other, at a loss for what to do. Almost in unison, all the soldiers simultaneously cast bewildered glances at Corleone. Everyone hadn't realized that after several back and forths, they had unconsciously begun to rely on the advice given by this doctor strategist. Since he was the people's choice, Corleone naturally stepped up. "Please be quiet, Miss Stark." He lowered his head and spoke clearly, word by word. Such vulgar and indecent words, coming from the mouth of a noble duke's daughter like yourself, are truly unladylike. "I'm not some lady, I'm a swordswoman." Arya, who was currently spitting at the Hound, seemed to have entered a mad dog mode, turning her head to Corleone and launching into a seamless tirade. "My swordmaster is the first sword of Bravos, he alone could cut down all of you. Ha ha ha." Upon hearing this, before Corleone could speak, the Hound nearby scoffed and laughed. "The first sword who died at the hands of Meryn fooling Trant. My grandma with a sword could cut down 10 Meryn Trants, if she were still alive. Arya, I told you, he didn't have a sword at the time. Look what I'm hearing, a first sword without a sword." The two continued to argue, the rhythm seemingly returning to before. However, this time, Corleone had no intention of letting them continue like this. "I need him to be quiet for a moment, Your Grace." He bowed slightly to Reg, who immediately understood and stepped forward, kneeing the Hound in the groin, which instantly shut him up. A heavy blow. Watching the Hound's pained expression, Corleone first subtly tightened his thighs, then extended his finger to the enraged the Hound. "Although I don't know why you, a loyal dog of Lannister, care so much about a girl from House Stark, I have to say, the Hound. Your acting is too clumsy." Saying this, Corleone straightened his back, the aura of prestige LV2 subtly emanating. His gaze swept over the bewildered faces of the soldiers, and he slowly spoke, "There is only one truth. This Hound clearly wants to protect her in this way, but he never imagined that such clumsy acting couldn't fool any of us. Because, we are all quite intelligent." At these words, the camp fell silent for a moment, the atmosphere somewhat awkward. "That's right." Suddenly, a soldier slapped his thigh. I knew something was off just now. You reacted too slowly. Another immediately scoffed disdainfully, as if he had seen through everything long ago. This hound is clearly using this argument to protect her, making us mistakenly believe their relationship is bad. Sly dog, trying to hide it from my wise eyes. For a moment, the soldiers suddenly realized, vying with each other to claim they had insight from the start, no one willing to admit that their thoughts had been completely swayed by the hound's argument just now. You. Looking at the man before her, who twisted black and white and had sharp words, Arya felt a chill run straight to her head. Even when facing Cersei, she had never experienced such a despicable and manipulative tactic. You. She stared intently at Corleone, her House Stark's signature gray eyes filled with pure hatred. Tell me your name. You fool. Arya secretly vowed to put this fellow at the top of her revenge list. However, Corleone not only didn't get angry but slowly squatted down, meeting her gaze, a mysterious smile on his face. Someone's name is not important, girl. He spoke, his voice as soft as a whisper, yet it clearly reached Arya's ears, because Valar Morghulis. This sentence exploded in Arya's mind, causing her to widen her gray eyes again in disbelief. Because Corleone's last sentence was not the common tongue of Westeros, but the phrase she had heard from Jaqen Hagar. All men must die. This doctor, who exactly is he? Watching Arya, too shocked to speak, Corleone's lips curved slightly. He hadn't expected that this phrase, which his predecessor had accidentally learned from a prostitute in Harrenhal 2 years ago, would come in handy here. The Northman soldiers nearby didn't understand Valyrian. They only saw Arya standing there as if she had been scared silly, which was undoubtedly a sign of guilt and fear. Ha ha. The girl has nothing to say. Reg shouted triumphantly. Doctor, stop wasting words with her. Quick, do it. Use the cruelest method you know. Make her scream, make her cry. I want to see how long this wild dog can endure. Yes. Do it. Let her taste it. Led by him, the soldiers all brandished their weapons, shouting excitedly. The atmosphere in the camp reached an unprecedented climax, all the malice and anticipation focused on Corleone and the small, thin girl. Corleone stumbled slightly, expressionless. He simply reached out to Arya, as if to untie her ropes. However, just then, stop right there, you fooled Southerners. What are you fools trying to do to Miss Stark? The moment he finished speaking, an exceptionally tall and burly Northman soldier strode forward. Removing his slightly loose helmet, he revealed a weathered, hard-lined face. 4 soldiers followed behind him. Seeing this, Corleone's lips curved slightly upward. His actions just now were not aimless. Relying on insight LV1, he had already noticed that this group of Karstark soldiers was not a unified front. Whether during the previous fighting, resting, or even just now while watching the forced interrogation, there were always 3 to 5 people who subconsciously kept a certain distance from the majority of their comrades. Their expressions were cold, even carrying a hint of imperceptible disdain. When Corleone proposed using Arya to threaten the Hound, clear disgust and indignation flashed across the faces of these few men. Disagreement represented a rift that could be exploited. Let us see. The tall soldier's voice was booming as he looked around and mocked. What great deeds are the valiant soldiers of House Karstark accomplishing? Ganging up to bully an unarmed little girl. His expression was utterly contemptuous. Reg immediately stepped forward upon hearing this, blocking his path. Stop, Halsin. We are interrogating them about the whereabouts of the gold dragons. If you want a share, watch quietly. If you're stupid enough to refuse money, don't stand here pointing fingers. The tall soldier named Halsin sneered again upon hearing this. How very clever of you, Reg. You'd lay hands on an unarmed little girl just because of a stranger's nonsensical words and those illusory gold dragons. Look closely. Her name is Arya Stark, the younger sister of the king in the north. The blood of House Stark flows through her veins. They have ruled the north for 10,000 years and are respected by all Northmen. Your filthy hands dare not touch her. You truly have no shame. His tone was severe. This stern and righteous questioning immediately choked Reg into silence, his face turning bright red. I'm doing this for the brothers, what do you know? How can this be considered bullying? He then stammered, throwing out words like, honor, and gold dragons. The forest immediately filled with an awkward atmosphere. Seeing this, Halsin sneered, just about to provoke him again, when a more gloomy voice came from behind him. You certainly put on a grand display, Halsin. He turned his head and saw Stow, who had been tending to Hogg, had walked over some time earlier. He paced forward and stood face to face with Halsin, his face dark. The two men were similar in build, and their imposing presence was evenly matched. What? You're so impressive just because you're a squad leader. If we made you the captain of the guard for Keho City later, would you even disregard House Karstark? Stow spoke again, stepping closer, his voice lowered but more threatening. Don't forget, you pledge allegiance to the Sunburst, not the direwolf of Winterfell. What did the Stark family ever give us? That foolish personally chopped off Lord Rickard's head. Hearing this, Halsin narrowed his eyes slightly, meeting Stow's gaze without flinching. Of course I haven't forgotten. I dare not forget the vengeance for Lord Rickard for even a moment. But then he changed his tone. If you want to seek revenge on the Kingslayer, I will follow. If you want to take Miss Stark to force Robb Stark to admit his faults and repent, I can also ignore it. But under my nose, using such despicable methods to insult and torture a little girl, a Stark, is unacceptable. The honor of Keho City warriors cannot be stained like this. Honor. Ha ha ha. Stow sounded as if he had heard a great joke. Ever since we left Keho City and headed south, you repeatedly stopped the brothers from taking spoils, saying that slaughtering those commoners wasn't honorable. Fine, it was only a little money, I tolerated it. Suddenly, his voice became sharp. But today, these 40,000 gold dragons concern the future livelihood and the capital for revenge for all of us. That money is enough for me to buy a large tract of land, or even obtain an earl's title. I am taking that gold. Not even the 7 gods can stop it, I say. Seeing Stow reveal his true intentions, Halsin immediately stared intently at those eyes filled with greed and rebuked. I saw through you long ago, Harag Stow. You constantly claim you are seeking vengeance for Lord Rickard, but in reality, it's all about the money. Clang. Seeing that the pretense was dropped and Halsin still showed no sign of wavering, Stow's patience finally ran out. He abruptly drew the blade from his waist, pointing it straight at the other man. Do you want to test if the sword in my hand is sharp? My sword is not dull either. At the same time, Halsin drew his own longsword, standing against him. Tensions were high. The soldiers behind Stow all drew their weapons, and Reg impatiently raised his sword. Behind Halsin, the 4 soldiers also drew their blades without hesitation and stood beside him. Although they were outnumbered, their morale was not weak in the slightest. In an instant, the air seemed to freeze. The blades constantly reflected cold light, illuminating both parties' faces, seemingly hinting at a fight to the death. However, Corleone noticed a flicker of hesitation in Stow's eyes. Well, looks like they won't fight. He shook his head slightly, disappointed, but then thought it reasonable. After all, they were currently south of Harrenhal and could encounter Lannister forces at any moment. Unless Stow, as the leader, was utterly foolish, he wouldn't choose this moment to start an internal conflict. Stop. Although slightly regretful, Corleone still took a step forward and spoke up. This is none of your business, you shameless fellow. Halsin glanced at him and growled, say one more word, and I'll cut you down to eventually. At the same time, Stow glared at Corleone, but a clear sense of relief could be seen in his eyes. Meeting everyone's gaze, Corleone showed no fear, merely shrugging slightly. I just wanted to say, I have a method that satisfies both sides. What method? Before Halsin could react, Stow readily seized the opportunity to back down, smoothly sheathing his blade, and urgently asked. Let me return to my camp. Corleone's tone was calm. In my satchel, I have some special concoctions. They can pry open the tightest mouths. That is to say, I can use them solely on the Hound, without needing to touch Miss Stark even once. Stopping, Corleone looked at the 2 men. This way, Captain Stow will gain the wealth he desires, and as for Lord Halsin, you uphold honor, and you don't hinder your comrades from acquiring their deserved spoils. How about that? As soon as he said this, the scene fell silent again for a long time. Expressions of wavering began to appear on the faces of both groups. This proposal was too tempting, it virtually solved the current deadlock perfectly. Especially for Stow. Since Lord Rickard's execution, he had managed with great difficulty to rally this troop based on the small amount of authority he had accumulated back then, and he had tasted the sweetness of being the man in charge these days. Now that there was a dignified alternative, he naturally did not want to see his team fall apart. As for Halsin, he fought to stop the atrocity and preserve honor, and he had no intention of forcing a bloody confrontation. If I see you plan to lay hands on Miss Stark again, you know the consequences. After delivering this harsh warning, Halsin said nothing more. He turned and left with his men, returning to where he had been sitting earlier. This gave Stow a way out. Doctor, well done. After the men left, Stow clapped Corleone heavily on the shoulder, praising him with satisfaction. Your mind is even sharper than Maester Vale's. As he spoke, without waiting for Corleone's reaction, he turned and waved a hand at Reg. You, take 4 men and escort him back to fetch the medicine, now. Yes, boss. Reg replied excitedly. Hearing this, Corleone felt reassured. Without further ado, he turned and prepared to leave. However, the moment he turned and took his first step, Stow's voice sounded behind him again. This time, it carried a hint of suspicion. Wait, Doctor. Corleone paused his steps and slowly turned around, displaying a perfectly timed hint of confusion on his face. Stow narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing him up and down, seemingly having sensed something, and demanded, Why are you doing all this? What exactly is your motive? This was undoubtedly a crucial question. A poor answer could render all his previous efforts useless. But Corleone could always provide the perfect answer. Ha! Under everyone's gaze, Corleone laughed. The previous calm focus on his face transformed into a smile mixed with a bit of mercenary calculation. Yet, this expression, appearing on his seemingly harmless face, was surprisingly persuasive. I forgot to tell you, Captain Stow. I am a man who loves to negotiate business, whether it's treating hog or solving problems within my capabilities for you. But I must say this up front, I don't work for free. He paused, and meeting Stow's gaze, he stated a reason that no one could doubt. If I truly find out the whereabouts of those 40,000 gold dragons, the 200 gold dragons you promised me earlier won't be enough. You have to pay more. Figures moving in the distance immediately alerted the people inside the camp. Brienne and Yigo gripped their sword hilts and stepped forward. They were first pleased to see Corleone leading the way, but their expressions immediately darkened when they saw several northern soldiers following him. Jaime immediately understood the look he was given, pulling up his cloak hood to conceal his overly conspicuous golden hair, and melting into the shadows. Where is the medicine? Doctor. Reg rushed ahead, urging impatiently before he even arrived. Where is the medicine you spoke of? Hurry up and find it. His tone was full of impatience, and his eyes swept over the people in the camp with a hint of arrogance. This arrogant attitude greatly annoyed the straightforward Brienne, who immediately gripped her sword hilt and stepped forward. However, just as she was about to speak out and reprimand him, Corleone arrived swiftly. Easy there, Captain Reg. He deliberately positioned himself ahead of Reg, still wearing his harmless smile, quickly scanning his companions in the camp, and then subtly made a hand gesture across his chest. The other's eyes lit up. Corleone turned around and spoke again. That potion takes some time to prepare. A slight difference in dosage means a world of difference in effect. If we kill the hound instead of making him talk, we won't get a single copper of those 40,000 gold dragons. I certainly won't joke around with my business. As he spoke, he slowly walked towards the seemingly messy satchels in the corner. Hearing this, Reg clicked his tongue in annoyance. But remembering the 40,000 gold dragons, he immediately suppressed his anger. His reaction did not escape Corleone's eyes, the corner of his mouth curved slightly. He pointed to the empty space by the bonfire and said casually, The sun has set, and the night air is chilly. Come sit by the fire for a bit. I promise it will be quick. Yigo also grinned, revealing a simple and honest smile. Yes, sit. Warm. As he spoke, he actively shifted his body to make space, and even the usually impulsive Brienne moved aside. Under the seemingly warm invitation of the group, Reg glanced at his companions behind him. Although they were all northerners, since there was a fire to warm themselves, who would choose to freeze outside the camp? Moreover, he didn't take Brienne and the others seriously at all. A sick man, a woman, a barbarian who couldn't even speak clearly, and one who seemed like a mute. In no way did they look like a combination that could pose a threat to his group. Go. Waving to his subordinates, Reg took the lead and sat down by the fire. Even so, their formation was meticulous, they sat back to back, subtly forming a defensive angle. Corleone diligently rummaged through his satchels, taking out various bottles and jars, deliberately making clinking sounds to appear busy. Reg and his men looked around warily, saying little. A small pot was suspended over the fire, simmering meat stew that bubbled and smelled fragrant. Wharton used a small knife to pick out the meat and divide it into several portions. Everyone picked up their portions and began eating, not minding the heat. Even Jamie, who was not far away, received a small piece. Only Reg and the men he brought could watch longingly, swallowing their saliva. Here, have some. Just then, Wharton seemed to notice his awkwardness, skewered a piece of meat with his dagger, and offered it to Reg. So this guy isn't mute. Reg thought to himself, swallowing another mouthful of saliva while looking at the fragrant piece of meat. But he still raised his hand to refuse. No need, we brought hardtack. As soon as he said this, a nearby soldier who had just reached out quickly withdrew his hand. Inside the camp, the 5 northern soldiers gnawed on their hardtack, staring intently at Wharton and the others who were feasting, grinding their teeth. They only relaxed when Wharton finished the last gulp of the stew with a gulp, gulp. Just as their attention was completely focused on the stew, Corleone, who had his back to them, quietly slid a sharp surgical scalpel into his sleeve and gripped it in his palm. Captain Reg. Feigning busyness, he spoke without turning his head, making conversation. I heard you are all from Keho City, right? Is it exceptionally cold there? Nonsense. Reg angrily bit into a piece of dry, hard bread and snorted impatiently. Is there any place in the north that isn't cold? As for you soft southerners, I guarantee that if you went to Keho City, your balls would freeze right off. Corleone chuckled upon hearing this. From a medical standpoint, the freezing point of the human body is the same for everyone. Which is to say, if that temperature could freeze off my balls, it should be able to freeze off everyone's. How can that be the same? Although he didn't understand the professional terms Corleone was using, Reg instinctively retorted. We northerners drink liquor that sets the blood on fire. We can stand naked in the cold wind for a day and a night and be fine, something you southern weaklings can't compare to. As soon as he finished speaking, Wharton, not far away, nearly burst out laughing. Is that so? Corleone didn't argue further, walking towards Reg as if casually. The north is a good place, just too cold. I've always wanted to see the magnificent wall. Musing, he reached Reg in a few steps and sat down right next to him very naturally. Oh, that reminds me. I see you're very skilled with a sword, old brother Reg. Lords everywhere are in great need of talent like yours right now. Once you get the gold dragons, why don't you come with us to Duskendale? Earl Like there is very close with Sir Finn. If you go there with your money and swear fealty to him, given your skill, Earl Like might even grant you a Viscount title if he's pleased. Then you could build a castle, marry a wife, and have some children. Isn't that much better than staying in the freezing north? At these words, Reg's hand gripping the hardtack couldn't help but tremble. A Viscount title. A castle. This incredibly tempting vision made his heart pound. However, Reg retained a sliver of rationality and pretended to decline. No, no. I have already sworn fealty to House Karstark. Lord Rickard treats me well, and the honor of a northerner doesn't allow me to do such a thing. PFF'd. But just as he finished speaking, a sharp dagger precisely plunged into the fatal triangle beneath his earlobe. Ah! Reg's eyes instantly bulged, and blood spurted along the dagger's groove, staining Corleone's cuff red. At the same moment, the 4 people in the camp moved almost simultaneously, each taking down one of the northern soldiers. There were no shouts, no fierce clash of steel, just several muffled thuds as bodies hit the ground, like a stage play rehearsed countless times. Reg, who still retained a shred of consciousness, then realized that the others had quietly moved closer to his men without him knowing when. But regret was already too late. In his final moments, his eyes instinctively turned toward Corleone, who had just been calling him brother. In a daze, he only heard one voice. Deep breaths. Dizziness is normal. Meanwhile, on the other side of the woods. Arya was tied beneath a large tree, her mind recalling the strange fellow who had recently told her, all men must die. After dark, find a chance to create chaos. It would be best if you could persuade that fellow named Halcyon to resist. You are a clever girl. Make good use of your identity as Miss Stark. Don't forget, your brother is waiting for you in Riverrun. Recalling the words Corleone had whispered in her ear when Stow and Halcyon were arguing, Arya lifted her head. A sleazy-looking northern soldier was staring intently at her with ill intent. This fellow had been staring at her like this since daytime. Although still young, Arya was not stupid, and naturally knew what the other party was thinking. Taking a deep breath, a daring plan formed in her mind. Hey! She looked up, showing the soldier an innocent expression, and declared confidently, I need to pee. The soldier was stunned, then looked pleased, and was about to agree, but immediately seemed to recall something and refused, saying, Captain Stow doesn't allow us to touch you, Stark. If you really can't hold it, just pee in your pants, ha ha ha. Hearing his lewd laughter, Arya first widened her eyes in anger. She immediately lowered her head, suppressing her rage, and tried her best to recall Sansa's mannerisms from before. She raised her eyes timidly and whispered, that is wrong. Mother will punish me. She paused, as if making a great resolve, and pleaded in a tearful voice, how about you help me take off my pants, and then help me put them back on after I'm done. Please. I really need to go. This helpless and pitiful posture instantly made the soldier's breathing ragged, his eyes fixed on Arya. Although the little girl in front of him was filthy, the identity of Miss Stark carried a fatal temptation in itself. He was just a low-ranking soldier his entire life. When had he ever imagined having the opportunity to get this close to a noble lady? Not to mention, the daughter of House Stark. Gulp tilde, he violently swallowed his spit. Lust had clouded his judgment, and all caution vanished. Heh, you asked me yourself. Squatting down impatiently, the soldier's right hand reached directly for Arya's inner thigh, intending to untie her belt. Now. Bang. Arya closed her eyes and used all her strength for a vicious headbutt, slamming hard into the man's face. Crack. Ah. The sound of a broken nose and the soldier's pig-like scream rang out simultaneously. Blood gushed from his nose, instantly staining his lips and chin red. Now. Arya grinned, and then screamed at the top of her lungs. No. What are you doing? Let go of me tilde, I'm still a child. Help. Help me. This sound, filled with terror and humiliation, instantly pierced the woods, shattering the previous silence. Hearing the surrounding area grow noisy, the soldier ignored the gushing nosebleed and rushed forward, desperately clamping his hand over Arya's mouth. Stop screaming. You stinking girl, scream again and I'll kill you. However, Arya's viciousness far exceeded his imagination. Ah! Another burst of sharp pain, and the soldier violently pulled back his hand. Looking down, he saw that a small piece of flesh had been ripped off the edge of his palm. Suffering repeated injuries, he instantly lost his mind. In a fit of exasperation, he slammed a fist hard into Arya's cheek. Arya saw stars from the blow, yet the cries from her mouth still did not stop. Help tilde, please don't hit me. You stinking fool, still pretending. Seeing her still rambling nonsense, the soldier angrily raised his hand to strike Arya again, but just as his fist was about to fall, his wrist was firmly grasped by someone. The soldier turned back in astonishment, instantly terrified. Halcyon. No. It wasn't me. I didn't. She started it. Seeing Halcyon's incredibly grim expression, especially his bloodshot eyes filled with rage, the soldier immediately wanted to explain. However, Arya was one step faster than him. He tried to rape me. She lifted her head, showing her swollen cheek and the streaks of blood at the corner of her mouth, and tearfully accused, he said strange things to me, like asking me to pee on myself for him to watch. When I refused, he hit me and tried to force me. With that, she wept heartbreakingly, perfectly embodying a helpless little girl who had suffered bullying. The soldier was going insane. After all, often only the person who falsely accuses you knows how truly wronged you are. You're fooling talking nonsense. You clearly started. Shut up. Seeing that he still dared to talk back, Halcyon had no intention of listening to his explanation. In a fit of rage, he smashed his fist into the soldier's already bloody face. Following that came a kick, then 2 kicks. While hitting him, he cursed, "You disgusting piece of filth. Are you trying to tell me that the daughter of House Stark would use her innocence and reputation to slander a piece of trash like you? Look at her, she is still just an ignorant child." The soldier was continuously beaten, feeling so wronged he wanted to vomit blood. He knew he had fallen into a trap, but he was currently unable to defend himself. He just wanted to quickly surrender and wait for Captain Stout to arrive to clear his name, but clearly, Arya had no intention of letting him go. Woo 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 tilde tilde. She stopped screaming and began to sob in despair and sorrow, seemingly talking to herself. "I was bullied by Cersei and Joffrey when I was in King's Landing, and now I'm being bullied by northern men again. Oh, mother. Sansa was right, now that father is dead, there really is no one left to protect us." These words were sharper than the keenest dagger, fiercely piercing the softest spot in Halsin's heart. All restraint and reason were instantly consumed by towering rage. Shing! The sharp blade was drawn. The soldier saw the murderous intent bursting from Halsin's eyes and was scared out of his wits, desperately begging for mercy. "Calm down. Captain Halsin. This fool is talking nonsense." PFF'd. The muffled sound of a blade piercing flesh rang out. The soldier's body suddenly stiffened, the light in his eyes quickly dimmed, and he stared blankly at Halsin before weakly collapsing. Halsin forcefully swung his sword, seemingly trying to fling the dirty blood off the blade. Only then did messy footsteps come from the surrounding woods. Stow rushed over with the remaining men, arriving just in time to see Halsin's longsword stained with blood and his subordinate dead on the spot. Shocked and furious, he gritted his teeth and roared, "What the hell are you doing, Halsin?" Facing Stow's questioning, Halsin remained completely unfazed. He stared intently into his eyes and, instead of defending himself, answered with righteous indignation, reiterating every word. "I told you, don't let me see you bullying Miss Stark again. You failed to control your subordinate, Stow, so I handled it for you." Hearing this, Stow's face immediately turned ashen. He glanced at the corpse of his subordinate lying on the ground, eyes wide in death, then looked at Arya nearby, who was covering her face and whose shoulders were constantly shaking with sobs. Stow knew exactly what kind of person this guy usually was. It must have been this idiot, unable to control his lower half, driven by lust, who caused this huge trouble. Stow cursed inwardly, having guessed 70 or 80% of the truth of the matter. However, being in the wrong was one thing, but Halsin bypassing him, the captain, and directly killing a man was quite another. This was equivalent to slapping him in public, severely challenging his authority. With so many eyes watching, if he, Harag Stow, backed down now, how could he lead his team in the future? He had to teach Halsin a lesson today, even if it was just for show. Clang! Having made up his mind, Stow immediately drew his longsword and pointed it straight at Halsin, right in front of all his subordinates. Just then, Halsin's companions arrived. Seeing the tense, hostile atmosphere, they swiftly stepped forward without hesitation, standing with Halsin, their hands resting on their sword hilts, ready for a standoff. The situation instantly became 5 against 8. Although Stow's side still maintained a numerical advantage, that advantage was now so small it was practically negligible. Moreover, Halsin and his men were all renowned fighters from Keho City. If a real fight broke out, even if Stow won, his side would certainly suffer heavy losses. It wouldn't be worth the cost. It's been over an hour, why hasn't Reg returned yet? The current situation was extremely tricky for Stow. He couldn't help but look back toward the other side of the woods, a sense of foreboding lingering in his heart. The other party's camp was no more than a league away, they should have returned long ago. After much deliberation, reason finally overcame impulse. It wouldn't be too late to settle the score with Halsin once Reg returned with his men and they had an absolute advantage. Thinking this, Stow forcefully suppressed his anger and pointed irritably toward the darkness outside the camp, ordering Halsin, "You, and your men, go replace Val and Ryan on watch. Starting today until we return to Riverrun." This was meant as both a punishment and a subtle form of banishment and marginalization, stripping them of their right to rest and move freely within the center of the camp. In Stow's opinion, this was the best way to assert his authority without resorting to violence. Fine. Sure enough, Halsin was silent for a moment but agreed nonetheless. After all, He understood that unilaterally executing a comrade was a serious act of insubordination. However, just as he signaled his men to sheath their weapons and turn to leave. Wah! Don't leave me alone, please. I want to go home. Arya, beneath the tree trunk, let out a timely, suppressed sob. This sound accurately pierced the softest part of Halsin's heart, like a noose tightly binding the honor he upheld. As if guided by a phantom, Halsin turned his head and met Arya's tear-filled eyes. Boom! A rush of hot blood surged to his head. That look, filled with fear, pleading, and longing for home, made Halsin completely cast aside all calculations and concerns. I am taking her away. Halsin stared directly at Stow and spoke with a firmness he had never used before. Hearing this, Stow froze, almost believing he had misheard. What did you say? I said, Halsin straightened his back and announced loudly in front of everyone, I am taking Miss Stark back to the north, back to her home, Winterfell. Go to hell. This righteous demeanor made Stow so angry he nearly jumped up. Pointing north, he roared, Are you out of your mind, Halsin? Don't forget, Moat Cailin is still in the hands of those fools. We can take a boat. Facing Stow's reprimand, Halsin refused to back down. We can land at White Harbor or Widow's Watch, any way will do. In short, I can no longer stand idly by. As a sworn soldier of the North, protecting a member of House Stark is my duty and my honor. Honor my ass. Looking at this stubborn, unbelievably idiotic fellow, Stow started swearing vehemently. You're so great, you're so noble. So only you uphold honor, and the rest of us are villains, is that it? Don't forget that Lord Rickard's grudge hasn't been settled yet. Robb Stark, that kinslayer, must pay the price. Halsin gripped his sword hilt tightly. Vengeance is a man's business, it has nothing to do with a little girl. In any case, your only goal is the gold dragons, isn't it? At this remark, Stow was momentarily choked into silence. Seeing his reaction, Halsin immediately pointed to the figure swaying from the tree nearby. You can keep the hound and deal with him as you please. I don't want a single coin. My only demand is to take Miss Stark away, nothing more. After speaking, Halsin ignored him, turned his head, and signaled one of his men, untie her. The soldier didn't hesitate, immediately stepping forward and pulling out his dagger to cut the ropes binding Arya. This decisive action made Stow's eyes bulge with fury. He could not tolerate it any longer. Halsin was clearly trying to forcibly steal their captive. If Halsin succeeded, what face would he, the captain, have left? Would this mean everyone could just leave whenever they wanted from now on? Stop him! Halsin roared, and several of his men drew their swords. Just as the tension reached its peak. Enemy attack! From the outskirts of the camp, a sentry's urgent shout suddenly rang out. This was immediately followed by several short, painful screams and the sound of heavy bodies falling. Before Stow and Halsin could react, chaotic shouts erupted around the camp, for Miss Stark. Kill them all! This sudden commotion made Stow's head buzz. He whipped around, his gaze locking onto Halsin, and in that instant, all his suspicions found the truth. You traitor! You brought the enemy here! Stow roared in fury, raising the longsword in his hand and slashing directly at Halsin, who was standing right next to him. Clang! Halsin hastily raised his sword to parry. The two blades struck hard against each other, sending sparks flying. As the two leaders engaged, the two groups immediately joined the chaotic melee, and the entire camp erupted into disorder. For a moment, the clanging and banging of weapons echoed continuously through the woods. The sounds of fighting continued on the perimeter. The men scattered as they fought, and soon, after leaving 3 corpses behind, the battle shifted elsewhere, leaving only Arya alone at the scene. Ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Perhaps she had been too repressed these past few days, but after staring blankly at the bloody corpses before her for a moment, Arya suddenly burst into loud laughter. But just as she was laughing with increasing glee, a voice suddenly reached her ear. I must say, you cunning little she-wolf. Your growth has exceeded my expectations. Arya shuddered all over. She turned her head, and illuminated by the campfire, half a face, twisted like maggots from burns, came into view. Just a few days later, the forests of the Riverlands were once again thrown into chaos. Shouts of killing, the clash of weapons, and wails of agony came from all directions, completely turning the camp upside down. In the center of the chaos, the battle between Stao and Halcyon was particularly fierce. Both men were renowned experts from Keho City. Their swordsmanship was swift and sharp. A soldier who tried to approach was instantly cut down, frightening the others into keeping their distance. Fighting and retreating, their eyes blinded by rage, they unknowingly left the main battlefield and reached a clearing where the trees were relatively sparse. Stop. Halcyon parried a heavy chop and tried to explain. Listen to me. Shut up. Stao didn't listen at all. Instead, his offense grew fiercer, his longsword whistling as it repeatedly struck at Halcyon's vital points, while he cursed relentlessly, "Fool traitor, why didn't I see through you sooner?" Seeing how unreasonable he was, Halcyon also grew angry. He stopped holding back, and his attack instantly became much faster. Clang! 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 Several continuous, powerful chops left Stao's arms numb, forcing him to stagger backward. Spotting an opening, Halcyon delivered a fierce side kick, slamming hard into Stao's abdomen. Ah! Stao cried out in pain, stumbled backward, and fell to the ground, his longsword flying out of his grasp. He stared at Halcyon in disbelief. This guy is actually that strong. Just as he prepared to pick up his sword and fight again, a cold sword tip instantly pressed against his throat. His chest heaving, Stao looked directly into Halcyon's eyes, raging, "Go on. Kill me, you traitor. I curse you. Your soul will never return to the north, you will never receive the protection of the heart tree, and you will forever drift in the cold winds." Hearing this, a flicker of anger crossed Halcyon's eyes. He stared intensely at Stao for a few seconds, and then, just as Stao closed his eyes awaiting death, he plunged the longsword down. However, it merely grazed his cheek and embedded itself deep into the muddy ground. Stao opened his eyes in confusion. Under the moonlight, Halcyon's face was resolute like a stone. "I am not like you, Stao. I always act with a clear conscience. Under the heart tree, there will always be a place for me." After speaking, he didn't spare the grounded Stao another glance. He turned and strode quickly toward the direction where Arya had been. After catching his breath for a while, Stao cautiously got back to his feet, filled with doubt and surprise. He touched the bloody scratch the sword had left on his cheek, then looked toward the direction where Halcyon had disappeared, his expression complex. In the end, he spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva, picked up his sword, and turned to charge toward the fiercest sounds of battle. Regardless, as the captain, he had to stabilize the situation first. However, just as he took a step, he suddenly noticed a figure draped in a dark cloak blocking his way, slowly approaching. As the figure walked, a longsword was faintly visible beneath the cloak. Shit. Stao stopped, spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva, and mocked himself. "I should have known that doctor was no good." Yet, the cloaked figure remained silent, continuing to approach slowly. Posing fool. Seeing this, Stao roared in fury and charged forward without hesitation, swinging his sword. Cling, 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 clang. The two instantly clashed, their blades striking a rapid succession of sparks. During the fight, Stao quickly realized something was wrong. His opponent was using his left hand, but the swordsmanship seemed extremely awkward and uncoordinated, and the strength was weak, almost like fighting a woman. Under normal circumstances, Stao could have defeated this level of opponent in 2 exchanges. But having just endured a fierce fight with Halcyon, his stamina was greatly depleted, and his arms were still sore and numb. For a moment, he was actually fighting this weak opponent to a standstill. Nevertheless, this kind of swordsmanship was enough to make Stao suspicious. "Who exactly are you?" He leapt backward to create distance, then shouted sharply, trying to recover some stamina by stalling for time. Fortunately, the cloaked figure did not continue the attack. Instead, he cooperated fully, standing still and slowly pulling back his hood. Stao's pupils contracted. Under the cold moonlight, a head of dazzling golden hair was illuminated. Watching Stao's momentary stunned expression, Jamie curled his lips into a mocking smile. "Weren't you having a great time cursing me earlier today? What? You can't recognize me when I'm standing right in front of you?" Saying this, he raised his blade with his left hand and roared, "Say my name, you fool." Hearing his roar, Stao's eyes instantly filled with excitement, his breathing grew heavier, and even his shoulders started trembling. "Kingslayer. Ha ha ha, Kingslayer. That is not my name, you fool." This insulting title instantly enraged Jaime. His eyes bloodshot, he roared and lunged forward, his left-handed sword slashing wildly at Stow, while he continuously bellowed like chanting a spell, "Say my name. Say my name." However, the left hand was ultimately not his dominant hand. This reckless, fierce assault caused his weaknesses to grow. After one full power clash, he couldn't hold the hilt. The longsword flew out of his hand and landed a few steps away. A warrior's instinct allowed Stow to immediately seize the chance, delivering a vicious headbutt that slammed hard into Jaime's face. Bang! With a muffled thud, Jaime's nose gushed blood, and he fell backward onto the ground, face up. Stow strode forward, laughing wildly and shouting, "Your name? Jaime Lannister. Jaime Lannister. Remember, you will die by the hand of Earl Rickard Karstark's personal guard. Harrig Stow. Die." The sword tip plunged down violently. However, a blade moved even faster, piercing precisely into Stow's back near his heart, penetrating his chest and emerging from the front. Thwack! Stow's movement froze midair. He looked down in disbelief, opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a sound. His body swayed, then he fell heavily forward, landing right beside Jaime, his eyes staring blankly at him, as if unable to accept this reality. He was so close to getting revenge. Jaime raised his head, still shaken, and saw Corleone's harmless face come into view. Clapping a hand over his profusely bleeding nose, he struggled to sit up. He looked at Stow's corpse beside him, then looked up at Corleone. Corleone ignored him. Instead, he first squatted down and rummaged through Stow's body. His brows lifted in delight as he pulled out the pouch containing 100 gold dragons and tucked it into his own pocket. "What are you looking at?" Seeing Jaime's complex look, Corleone rolled his eyes at him and joked, "I know you Lannisters always pay your debts, but this guy still owed me money. It's not like I can let you hog all the glory every time. Also." Saying this, he pointed at Stow's corpse, then at Jaime's pathetic state. "Next time you decide to hand over your head, could you at least give a signal? If my swordsmanship hadn't reached minor mastery, we would be dragging your corpse back to King's Landing. Sir Jaime Lannister. By the shore of God's Eye Lake. Two figures, one large and one small, rode on a single horse, sneaking westward along the lakeshore. The cold night wind made Arya almost unable to open her eyes. She gripped the saddle tightly, and only by straining her neck could she barely see the hound, whose burned profile looked even more hideous in the moonlight. After a moment of silence, she couldn't help but ask loudly, "Hey! How exactly did you get down from that tree?" "Heh heh," the hound sneered, pulling a dagger from the leather bracer on his wrist. "I have that pesky Beric Dondarrion to thank for this. I learned my lesson after his men tied me up last time. You always need to keep a little something hidden on you that can save your life, right?" After speaking, he glanced down at the little girl in front of him. "But speaking of which, how did you think of using that fellow named Halsin? Honestly, that was a pretty good trick. Even I'm a little impressed." Hearing Halsin's name, Arya offered no explanation. Instead, she looked back worriedly at the forest where shouts of killing echoed. "We have to go back and help him." Her stubborn tone reminded the hound of her father. Help him. However, he quickly recovered and let out a burst of laughter that made Arya's ears ring. "Forget it. Look at the two of us, little she-wolf. One of us was beaten half to death, and the other only saved her skin by playing the pitiful damsel. What are we going to use to help him? But he helped me. That was his choice." The hound growled impatiently. "This has nothing to do with me, and nothing to do with you." Hearing this, Arya angrily elbowed the hound in the stomach, but the chainmail jarred her own arm painfully. Nevertheless, she ignored it and continued to chatter. "Halsin is a Northman, he is still fiercely loyal to Stark, and he upheld his honor. To hell with honor." That word completely ignited the hound's fury. He yanked the reins, forcing the horse to slow down slightly. With his other hand, he pressed the blunt edge of the dagger against Arya's neck and threatened, "Those who cling to honor are all dead, fool. Rhaegar Targaryen fought honorably, and he died horribly. Your father upheld his honor, and his death was not noble either. So, stop talking to me about this fooled honor. Honor doesn't feed you, and it certainly won't keep you alive in a world like this." It was as if he was trying to teach Arya his own way of survival through this brutal method. However, hearing the hound mention her father, Arya's eyes immediately reddened, and she instinctively wanted to curse him back with the most vicious words she knew. Just at that moment, whoosh! A whistling sound cut through the air behind them. The hound was startled and had no time to dodge, but fortunately, the arrow only grazed the horse and plunged deeply into the mud ahead. Nay tilde tilde. The warhorse was startled and nearly threw both of them off. The hound exerted great effort to steady it. Turning sharply, he saw a tall Northman soldier standing not far away, his longbow already drawn and aimed at him. Halsin. The moonlight illuminated the man's face, and Arya cried out in surprise. The hound, however, spat and remained silent. Seeing that Arya seemed unharmed, Halsin first breathed a sigh of relief, then shouted sternly, "Do not harm Miss Stark, you despicable brute. Let her go. Harm her." His tone infuriated the hound, who roared savagely, "Are you blind, you fool? Can't you tell I'm protecting her?" Halsin didn't speak, he merely shifted his gaze to the dagger the hound had pressed against Arya's throat. The hound reacted instantly, quickly withdrawing the dagger, and snapped irritably at Arya, "Explain yourself, little she-wolf." But he didn't know that his previous actions had already cost him Arya's trust. Remembering how the hound had let the Karstark soldiers insult her, only caring about the gold dragons, a thought of revenge surged through her. She suddenly used all her strength to shout toward Halsin, "He kidnapped me. He wants to take me to Riverrun to demand a ransom from my brother. Save me." Shit. This blatant lie infuriated the hound, and he instinctively clapped a hand tightly over Arya's mouth. But this rough action, in Halsin's eyes, was undeniable proof that the hound was trying to silence her after his crime was exposed. Stop. Halsin's eyes were wide with fury. Since Arya was blocking the hound, he dared not shoot an arrow for fear of hitting her. He threw down his bow, drew the longsword at his hip, and immediately charged the hound on horseback, giving him no chance to explain. The hound cursed, shoved Arya aside slightly, and was forced to fight. Clip-clop. Clip-clop. The warhorse charged with strong momentum. The hound was already severely wounded, had lost a lot of blood, and hadn't eaten in a long time, his strength was already at its limit. Clang. When the two swords clashed, the hound felt his arm go numb, and the powerful impact knocked both him and Arya off the horse. Seeing the hound fall, Halsin turned his horse around, preparing for the final blow. However, just as he charged again, the hound scrambled up from the ground, the dagger from his bracer reappearing in his hand, and with his last ounce of strength, he hurled it. Thwack. His luck was good, the dagger struck the horse's eye, and the warhorse crashed to the ground, violently throwing off the unprepared Halsin. Seizing the opportunity, the hound struggled to pick up the dropped longsword and walked step by step toward Halsin, who was too stunned by the fall to get up. Only then did Arya look up and see the scene, quickly shouting to stop him, "Don't kill him." But hearing her voice, there was no hesitation on the hound's face. He walked up to Halsin, and the moment the man lifted his head, the longsword in the hound's hand plunged down without hesitation, piercing straight through his chest. PFF'd. Halsin's body shuddered, and he could no longer get up. No. Watching him die at the hound's hands, Arya's anger immediately erupted. She rushed toward the hound recklessly, punching and kicking him with all her might. While hitting him, she cried out, "Why did you kill him? Why? You killed Micah, and now you've killed Halsin. You monster, you devil. Die." However, the hound was completely enraged by her hysterics and struck her with a backhand punch. Bang! Arya stumbled and fell onto the ground, looking utterly stunned. The hound squatted down, his burned face resembling a demon in the moonlight. He grabbed Arya's collar and growled in a low, deep voice, "Listen. That fool was trying to kill me, so I killed him. And you." He aggressively poked Arya's chest. "If you had been willing to speak the truth just now, he wouldn't be dead. This is your fault, do you understand?" The roaring and accusations made Arya's ears buzz, and made her feel even more furious and wronged. Gritting her teeth, she instinctively reached for needle at her waist, but found nothing. Only then did she remember that the thin sword Jon had given her had been confiscated when she was captured. Just as the two were glaring angrily at each other, the sound of hoofbeats came from the edge of the nearby forest, followed by crisp clapping. Clap, clap, clap. The clapping was slow and steady, sounding particularly jarring by the silent lakeshore. That was truly spectacular, Sandor Clegane. I didn't expect you to still have such fighting strength after being so severely wounded. But, this is fine too. The Hound and Arya simultaneously turned their heads sharply to look. They saw a figure riding toward them, stopping about a dozen paces away. They exchanged a look, and both cried out in surprise. The doctor. She is mine, doctor. Despite his physical exhaustion and barely being able to stand, the Hound forced himself to lift his heavy longsword, staggered forward a step, and completely shielded Arya behind him. He brandished the longsword single-handedly in a bluff, though the tip was visibly trembling, pointing it directly at Corleone, and shouted menacingly but weakly, "Dare to come one step closer, and I'll kill you just like I killed that guy. I'll butcher you." Looking at this stubborn man, Corleone remained silent, choosing not to mock his obvious weakness. He approached a few more steps until the distance narrowed to the Hound's acceptable limit, then calmly dismounted. Clang! With a crisp sound of metal scraping, Corleone drew his sword. Oh, it was Stow's before. No. Seeing Corleone advance with the blade raised and the Hound aggressively stepping forward as well, Arya shrieked. She lunged forward, desperately hugging the Hound's armored boot, and cried out, "He was helping me. It was him. He was the one who suggested I create chaos and convince Halsin to rebel against Stow." After the bloody lesson she had just received, she finally learned to clarify the situation before the conflict escalated. What? A flicker of surprise crossed the Hound's single eye. He instinctively glanced down at Arya, then abruptly raised his head to stare at Corleone. He quickly reviewed the events of the day in his mind, and sure enough, things started to make sense. However, just as the Hound was about to breathe a sigh of relief, he noticed Corleone remained silent, holding his sword level, and steadily continuing to approach. Although he wasn't particularly tall or imposing, his demeanor carried immense pressure. Stay back. Even with Arya's explanation, this threatening movement made the Hound extremely wary, and he warned him sharply again. Fortunately, after that roar, Corleone finally stopped a few steps away from them. The Hound gasped for breath, struggling to maintain his tough posture. "Though I don't know why you helped us, Doctor. But she is my captive now, and I'm taking her with me, now." Immediately after he made his statement, Corleone finally spoke. "That was indeed my intention, however. What benefit does that offer me, Lord Clegane?" His voice was calm, as if discussing the ownership of an object. Hearing this, the Hound straightened his back. "Benefit? The benefit is that you won't needlessly lose your life over this. Is that enough?" "Oh." Threatened like this, Corleone tilted his head, his face showing an expression as if he were genuinely considering the proposal. This expression made the Hound believe he had intimidated him, and he turned, intending to leave with Arya. "Not enough." "What?" The Hound thought he had misheard, turning his head to stare wide-eyed at Corleone. "I said." Corleone raised his eyes, the moonlight filtering through the leaves made his eyes extremely bright. For a moment, the Hound felt as if the other man had seen through his flesh and bone, penetrating his outward pretense. "The terms you offered are not enough." Ignoring the Hound's thoughts, Corleone continued, "I am a man who enjoys making deals. However, a deal must be equitable for both parties. And clearly," he said lightly, his gaze sweeping from the Hound's trembling sword tip up to his pale face. "The terms you offered are not fair, my lord." Saying this, he took another step forward. This single step caused the Hound's heart to sink completely. He knew his bluff was about to be seen through. Normally, he could fight 5 men like Corleone with one hand, but having exhausted all his strength now, the Hound had no confidence. He hadn't eaten anything for 3 full days. Gritting his teeth, the Hound made one last attempt to persuade him. "I don't have any gold dragons for you, not a single copper. Before those fools captured me, all my money was stolen by that scoundrel Beric Dondarrion. They had no honor. They lost the trial by combat but seized most of my belongings, leaving me only my horse and armor. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have been starving for 3 days straight." The Hound explained angrily, instinctively believing that Corleone was clinging to him because of the illusory 40,000 gold dragons. However, the other man's reply greatly surprised him. "No, no, no." Corleone slowly shook his head. 40,000 gold dragons are indeed tempting, but I am not here for them. Dondarrion and his brotherhood without banners are virtually unrivaled in the Riverlands. I have no reason to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. Saying this, he glanced between the hound and Arya, then grinned. I want you. Oh no, I want both of you. To owe me a favor. This request was completely unexpected by the hound, leaving him momentarily stunned. Oh, a favor. What the hell, is he crazy? He had expected Corleone to make a more concrete demand, such as asking for his armor, his weapon, or even requiring him to kill a specific person. But, oh, a favor. What kind of deal is that? What normal person would make such a request at a life or death moment like this? Looking at Corleone's calm face, for the first time, the hound felt that this strange doctor was far more eccentric and dangerous than he had imagined. Fine. Although he didn't understand, the hound didn't want to tangle with this strange man any longer. He just wanted to escape quickly. I owe you a favor, and so does she. Now can we leave? Saying this, he pulled Arya up and turned to walk away. Wait. Predictably, Corleone's voice, like a curse, sounded again from behind them. What now? The hound had completely lost his patience, growling irritably. This doctor was even more annoying than the mountain. But Corleone remained calm, stating naturally, You are not serious, my lord. Your answer was too casual, which means you have not taken the weight of this favor to heart. You haven't even asked my name. Enough. The hound was so agitated he nearly exploded, wanting only to get away from this lunatic. I remember. I'll bloody remember. No, you won't remember. Corleone still shook his head, his gaze turning sharp. People are always forgetful, especially regarding things they don't want to remember. I need you to remember this favor for the rest of your life, and when I need it, you must repay it to me, no matter what. So, to make sure you remember. Before he finished speaking, he strode forward quickly, swinging the longsword in his hand sharply ahead. Clang! The hound instinctively blocked with all his strength, only to find nothing in front of him. He turned in astonishment, seeing Corleone's blade perfectly parrying a sword that had silently thrust out from the shadows beside him. Corleone put force into his wrist, deflecting the blade, and turned his head toward the shadow, grinning with a hint of mockery. You're slow. What? Has iron leg, rusted. Captain Worden. From the shadows, a grim face slowly emerged. It was Worden. But at this moment, his eyes shifted slightly, locking coldly onto Corleone. How did you know I would come? His voice was very low. Looking at Corleone, who stood holding his sword, Worden felt no real threat from him. At the training grounds in Harrenhal, Worden had personally witnessed him practicing swordsmanship. Those awkward, clumsy movements convinced him that Corleone was nothing more than a beginner who had just picked up a weapon. As for the hound, that fellow certainly had a reputation and had even won a tourney, but now he couldn't even stand steady. Corleone shifted his wrist, the sword tip tracing a cold arc under the moonlight. He spoke with a playful tone. I've been pondering this the entire journey. What exactly was the reward Roose Bolton wanted you to retrieve from King's Landing? I considered countless possibilities, but none of them felt quite right. It wasn't until yesterday, when I inadvertently caught the look in your eyes directed at Miss Stark, that I suddenly understood. Saying this, Corleone smiled slightly. I heard that while Lord Bolton's only legitimate son died, he still has a fool. If he wants to control the North, nothing is more convenient than marrying a Stark daughter, right? But unfortunately, he didn't know that Arya Stark had already escaped King's Landing, only to run right into you. Worden listened silently, staring at Corleone with immense curiosity for a long time before finally commenting with deep admiration. You truly are clever, Sir Corleone. I have never met anyone smarter than you. Sometimes I even think your wisdom surpasses Lord Bolton's. But unfortunately, clever people often don't live long. I must take her today. You fool, did you forget someone else is here? Just then, the hound beside them let out an unexpected roar, raising his sword with both hands and hacking down at Worden. However, just as Worden had judged, he couldn't even stand steady, let alone swing a sword at someone. Worden easily sidestepped. Bang! A backhand punch landed on the hound's face, sending him tumbling down right next to Arya, unable to get up again. Move aside. Worden was calm about defeating King's Landing's tourney champion. It was like swatting a mosquito. He continued pointing his sword at Corleone. You are an interesting person. I don't want to kill you. But Corleone showed no intention of moving. Instead, the corner of his mouth curled up slightly. To be honest, Worden, you are also a very interesting fellow, but I genuinely want to try and see what it feels like to kill you. As he spoke, he stood firm with his sword, adopting a fighting stance. Ha! Hearing this, Worden let out a cold laugh. Don't be naive. Your Dothraki guards and that big woman are still busy fighting those fellows from Keho City. You cannot stop me, nor do you have the ability to. There is never, cannot, in this world, Corleone calmly replied. Worden gave him a deep look, seemingly considering his words, but bound by duty, he ultimately strode forward, delivering a simple yet fierce diagonal chop aimed directly at Corleone's right shoulder. Ah! The speed of this strike was not top tier, but the power was heavy and fierce, and the intent was clear. In his anticipation, given Corleone's poor swordsmanship, the opponent would definitely be unable to block this strike. The start of the fight meant the end. However, clang! A crisp impact sound rang out. Worden's eyes widened. He watched in disbelief as his sword blade was easily parried by Corleone yet again. Once was a coincidence, but twice. Frowning slightly, the experienced Worden immediately twisted his wrist, retracting the blade while simultaneously delivering a rapid flurry of straight thrusts toward Corleone's chest and abdomen. This was his specialty, relying on astonishing speed. Almost no one at Dreadfort was his match. But Corleone's reaction surprised him again. Although his footwork still appeared somewhat messy and clumsy, he was not falling behind. Even though he was slightly inferior in speed, he was always able to create space to dodge by relying on broad, sweeping sword moves. This set of movements lacked any grace, yet it reminded Worden of Brienne. That's right, it seemed this swordsmanship was indeed taught by that woman. But why? Worden was utterly shocked. He clearly remembered that at the Harrenhal training grounds, Corleone couldn't even manage the most basic stance without swaying, and his movements when swinging the blade were uglier than chopping firewood. How many days had passed since then? Even if he practiced day and night without stopping, it would be absolutely impossible to hone his swordsmanship to this level. This level of proficiency required years of bloody battles to cultivate. Had he been hiding his strength all along? Or was it, that this boy was truly a genius? Clang! 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 As time passed, the clashing of blades grew more frequent. Fine beads of sweat broke out on Worden's forehead. The longer he fought, the more unnerved he became, not due to physical exhaustion, but because Corleone seemed to be adapting to his rhythm at a visible speed. The clumsy footwork gradually stabilized, the frequency of his sword parries increased, and he even began attempting simple counterattacks. Although Worden deflected every one of them, the timing and the angle of the strikes were absolutely not those of a novice. This is impossible. Another powerful, heavy chop followed, but Corleone still held his sword horizontally across his body with both hands, firmly blocking it. Under Worden's shocked and angry gaze, Corleone panted heavily, yet grinned at him. It seems the word, impossible, needs to be redefined, Captain Worden. He pushed hard, forcing Worden's blade away, and took a few steps back himself. Corleone could feel the webbing between his thumb and forefinger tearing, and the muscles in his arms were aching intensely. The pain and exhaustion were incredibly real, yet they made him feel utterly intoxicated. Thrilling. No wonder Jaime and Brienne both liked to grab their swords and fight whenever they got the urge. It turns out this stuff really is addictive. What a pity. Corleone glanced at the basic swordsmanship LV2 on his system panel and shook his head. As early as when he killed Reg, he had awakened basic swordsmanship LV1, and later used the gold dragons he had taken back from Stout to raise it to LV2. But clearly, this small increase was not enough to defeat Worden, who was one of the best fighters at Dreadfort. Although he hadn't lost the fight just now, his strength and speed were far inferior to his opponents. He was holding on purely through the boost from inside LV1, combined with his years of experience as a surgeon. Fortunately, Worden was indeed an excellent sparring partner. After the recent fight, Corleone was already able to integrate some of his own understanding into the swordsmanship taught by Brienne. Seeing the excitement in Corleone's eyes, Worden couldn't help but curse under his breath. He didn't know that Corleone was already at the end of his tether, he was simply astonished by the speed of his opponent's improvement. If they continued fighting like this, would, Iron Leg, Worden truly be defeated by a beginner? He couldn't afford to get entangled with him any longer. Gritting his teeth, Worden roared, then his entire body erupted with strength. Gripping the sword hilt with both hands, he unleashed a heavy, powerful horizontal sweep aimed directly at Corleone's waist and abdomen. This strike abandoned almost all defense, it was purely and completely focused on offense. After all, earlier, due to his contempt for his opponent's swordsmanship, he had fallen into a trap, relying solely on skill against Corleone while neglecting his own equipment advantage. Worden was fighting almost fully armored against an unarmored opponent. With this desperate fighting style, even if Corleone's blade struck his torso, the damage inflicted would be very limited. But if he managed to strike Corleone even once, the best outcome for Corleone would be immediate incapacitation. Worden intended to use this trade a blow strategy to completely overwhelm his opponent. This strike was unavoidable. However, just when Worden thought this move was guaranteed to succeed, in a blur, he saw. Under the moonlight, a gold coin slowly ascended. Ding tilde tilde. Let's make a wager, Worden. The moment those words calmly left Corleone's mouth, Worden instinctively felt that his world was starting to become drastically different. Time seemed to freeze at that moment. The sword, raised halfway, was unable to fall, as if stuck in viscous amber. Everything around them, the swaying woods, the cold moonlight, God's Eye Lake, even the hound and Arya tensing behind him, began to rapidly fade, blur, and completely disappear. It was as if they had been peeled away from this world. Only he and Corleone remained. What exactly is this? Worden struggled to speak, an unprecedented palpitation in his chest, as if he stood before some unspeakable, great existence. Let's make a wager, Worden. Corleone spoke again, his voice echoing in the void. Although there was no light source, the gold dragon in his hand emitted a glow that Worden could not tear his eyes from. I know you are the best warrior in Dreadfort. Your sword has drunk the blood of countless men and severed who knows how many heads. You have unparalleled confidence in your own blade. But, Corleone changed his tone, the corner of his mouth curving slightly. Just now, before you swung your sword, I already broke it. Which means, what you are tightly gripping now is nothing more than a pitiful broken sword. Hearing this, Worden subconsciously looked down at his hand. The finely forged steel blade was gleaming and clearly intact. What the hell are you talking about? He forced himself to calm down and roared, though his aggression sounded hollow. You don't believe me, do you? Corleone grinned, his smile appearing deeply mysterious under the glow of the gold dragon. Then let's make a wager. The stake is this one gold dragon. Saying this, he flicked his finger, tossing the dazzling gold dragon, which spun in the air. I wager that your blade cannot chop off my head. The instant the words fell, Worden seemed to see the light of the gold dragon flicker violently. Immediately afterward, he felt as if he had pressed his handprint onto some supreme document of rule. What kind of joke is this? Worden took a deep breath, trying to dispel the absurd feeling. The pride of being Dreadfort's strongest warrior burned in his chest, and he roared, using his voice to embolden himself, don't think you can scare me with these pretentious tricks. My blade, Worden's blade, will never miss. Arg. He used all his strength to break free from the invisible stagnation and viciously chopped toward Corleone's neck. This single strike was imbued with all his belief, his strength, and his lifelong understanding of swordsmanship. He absolutely had to win. Yet, facing such a blow, Corleone neither dodged nor retreated, and he didn't even make any move to block. He simply stood still, the same unsettling, mysterious smile still playing on his lips. And then, clang! Worden watched helplessly as the steel rapier he had absolute faith in snapped the very instant it touched the skin of Corleone's neck. The front half of the blade arced through the air and dropped lightly to the ground, leaving only a ridiculous half-sword in his grasp. It broke, it really broke. No. Worden's worldview utterly collapsed at that moment. It wasn't just the blade that broke. The moment the sword snapped, he felt something inside him that had supported him his entire life also break. That was his confidence and his dignity. He was no longer the feared, iron-leg Worden, but merely a pathetic wretch who had failed completely. Thud. His knees gave way, and Worden, unable to support himself any longer, crashed heavily onto the ground. The light left his eyes, replaced only by boundless terror and confusion, as if an invisible giant hand had drained all the strength from his body. Only then did Corleone slowly step forward, reach out, and gently grab Warden's hair, lifting his head to fully expose his vulnerable neck. Mercy. Pulled by the rule, Warden had completely lost the will and courage to resist. Like a lost lamb, he stared blankly at Corleone, using his last bit of strength to murmur a plea. Please, spare me. Lord Corleone, please give me another chance. Listening to his pathetic begging, Corleone's gaze remained stern, even carrying a hint of pity. As I have always said, Warden. But he ultimately spoke coldly, delivering the final judgment to Warden. In this world, women and children are permitted to make mistakes, but men are not. You made your choice, and that choice was betrayal. Therefore, it is only right that you bear the consequences of that choice. Next, Corleone raised his longsword. I, Vito Corleone. He whispered softly, murmuring continuously in the darkness, in light of your crime of betrayal, in the name of House Corleone. Sentence you to death. As the whispering ended, in Warden's sight, Corleone's face seemed to gradually blur and undergo a change. It had no eyes, yet it seemed to possess insight into everything. It had no mouth, yet it pronounced the final fate. This face slowly merged with the face etched into the weirwood in his memory, resembling the old gods worshipped by all Northmen since ancient times. So, that's how it is. Warden muttered to himself, a wave of regret rising in his heart. However, it was too late. Peesh tilde tilde. The blade pierced the side of the neck with perfect precision, then was swiftly and cleanly pulled out. Warden's body swayed, the last spark of light in his eyes extinguished completely, and he pitched forward. Having finished, Corleone stood straight by the lake, lightly performing a sword flourish. Swish. With a flick of his wrist, he shook all the warm blood drops from the blade onto the grass, his movement as elegant as brushing away dust. He turned his head and looked into the distance. The hound Sandor Clegane was sitting weakly on the ground, leaning on Arya for support to keep from collapsing entirely. Both of them were staring fixedly at him with expressions of extreme shock. What the hell are you? The hound was rambling incoherently, but suddenly recalled his previous experience with the Brotherhood without banners, and changed his question. You and Dondarrion's men. I have nothing to do with them. Corleone interrupted him directly, but did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to his warhorse, unfastened something from it, and threw it to Arya. Needle. She caught it blankly, and after realizing what was in her arms, Arya shouted excitedly, then looked at Corleone with grateful eyes. I said you both owe me a favor. Now it seems you will remember it forever. Watching the little girl's joy, Corleone's lips curved slightly, and he then bowed slightly, like an artist who had just completed a perfect performance on stage. Allow me to introduce myself, both of you. His voice returned to its usual peaceful tone, and he spoke softly. My name is Vito Corleone. Thanks for watching.